Goofy Good TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. We got Taco Tuesday. Trump always chickens out. The world is laughing at Trump. The U.S. is humiliated. World news. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, let's get right into the content. Salute.
From the ancient arteries of the Silk Road to the steel veins of a modern railway, history has a habit of repeating itself. Only this time, the caravans are locomotives and the silk is black gold. While Washington's war planners were high-fiving each other in the Situation Room, convinced that parking a carrier strike group in the Gulf of Oman would bring the Iranian nation to its knees, something remarkable was happening thousands of miles away in the heart of Eurasia. A new rail line, barely a few years old, has suddenly become the most important piece of infrastructure on the planet. A land bridge carrying Iranian crude straight into the industrial heartlands of China, completely outside the reach of the American Navy.
Hormuz blocked? No problem. That's the message coming out of Tehran, as Iran rapidly scales up a strategic rail corridor with China to bypass mounting maritime pressure in the Gulf.
Instead of relying on ships, Iran is trying a different route here. Railways.
Last week, Northwest China's Ningxia-Hui Autonomous Region launched the first sea rail intermodal freight train to Iran. It's a massive boost for Iran, which sits right in the heart of Asia, as China is its most important trading partner.
What we are witnessing is nothing short of a spectacular geopolitical backfire, a masterclass in strategic patience, making a mockery of the blockade doctrine that has underpinned American foreign policy since the age of Mahan. The warmongers in the White House and their counterparts in the occupation entity believed they had engineered the perfect economic chokehold: strangle Iran's maritime exports through the Strait of Hormuz, starve Chinese refiners of their most attractive feedstock, and watch as both nations buckled under the pressure, forced to accept whatever humiliating terms Trump dictated at the negotiating table. Instead, the exact opposite has happened, and the speed with which Beijing and Tehran have pivoted to this overland corridor has left the architects of maximum pressure utterly stunned. If you are as outraged as I am by the endless American appetite for economic warfare against sovereign nations, smash that like button right now and share this video everywhere you can. Drop a comment below, even if it is just a single dot, because every single interaction tells the algorithm that people deserve to hear the side of this story that the corporate media deliberately suppresses. And while you are at it, subscribe to this channel and ring that bell, because honest journalism, the kind that refuses to parrot the talking points of empire, depends entirely on the support of people like you. Now, let us take a deep forensic dive into this extraordinary story and understand exactly how two ancient civilizations outmaneuvered the most powerful military machine on Earth with nothing more than steel rails, patient diplomacy, and a shared determination.
Do you support Israel and the Jewish people? Now, more than ever, Israel needs
to defend their sovereign rights. To understand the sheer audacity of what has just been unveiled, we first need to rewind the clock and situate this railway within the broader sweep of Sino-Iranian economic cooperation, a relationship that has been quietly but deliberately deepened over decades, precisely in anticipation of the kind of belligerent American escalation we are seeing today. The foundation of this partnership is the 25-year Comprehensive Strategic Partnership signed back in 2021, a sweeping agreement under which Beijing committed to investing approximately $400 billion into the Iranian economy over a quarter of a century, covering everything from telecommunications and banking to transport and energy infrastructure. In return, China secured exactly what its industrial machine craves most: a guaranteed long-term supply of Iranian crude oil at heavily discounted rates, typically hovering around $8 to $10 per barrel below the Brent benchmark. For context, even before the latest blockade, China was already buying upwards of 80 to 90% of all Iranian oil exports, with daily imports averaging around 1.4 million barrels per day in 2020. These barrels are not just any barrels, they are the lifeblood of China's legendary independent refiners, the so-called teapots concentrated in Shandong province, which operate on razor-thin margins and depend precisely on the steep discount that sanctioned Iranian crude provides. This is the economic reality that makes the latest rail development so devastating to Washington's calculations. The China-Iran energy relationship is not a casual affair that can be severed by parking ships in the Gulf. It is a deeply embedded, structurally integrated symbiosis that both parties have every incentive to protect and expand. That brings us directly to the physical geography of the rail corridor itself, a route that I want you to visualize clearly because understanding its topology is the key to understanding why the blockade is failing so spectacularly. The primary overland artery departs from major Chinese logistics hubs such as Xi'an, Yiwu, and Zhengzhou, where massive freight trains are assembled and dispatched westward. These trains cross into Central Asia through the Alatau Pass or the Korgos Gateway, entering Kazakhstan before traversing the vast steppe and cutting south through Turkmenistan. The entry point into Iran is the Sarex border crossing in the country's northeast, a historical gateway that now serves as the eastern terminus of the Islamic Republic's railway network, channeling freight directly to the Apron dry port on the outskirts of Tehran. This is not some rudimentary backroad cobbled together in desperation. It is a fully operational, standardized intermodal corridor stretching over 10,000 kilometers with a transit time of merely 12 to 15 days, dramatically faster than the 30 to 40 days a maritime shipment would require, even in peacetime, to say nothing of the chaos that has engulfed the Persian Gulf shipping lanes. Before the war erupted, a single cargo train might depart from Xi'an once a week. Since the blockade began in earnest on April 13th, that frequency has surged to one train every 3 to 4 days. And logistics operators on the ground report that the entire schedule for May was fully booked well in advance. Plans are already in motion to add additional capacity in June, and freight brokers specializing in the route confirm that the costs, while elevated roughly $7,000 per 40-foot container, about 40% above peacetime levels are being absorbed because the alternative is simply no supply at all. Here is where the strategic genius of the Chinese and Iranian planners really comes into focus. And it is something the warmongers in Washington completely failed to anticipate. For more than a decade, the central obsession of American military doctrine in the Indo-Pacific has been the so-called Malacca Dilemma, the vulnerability of China's maritime energy supply lines to a naval blockade at the narrow Strait of Malacca. Chinese strategists have been thinking about this problem since at least the early 2000s, when they watched with alarm as the United States consolidated its access to Singapore's Changi Naval Base, a facility purpose-built to accommodate the largest American aircraft carriers. The Belt and Road Initiative, with its sprawling network of rail corridors, pipelines, and port investments stretching from the South China Sea all the way to the Mediterranean, has always been at its core a comprehensive solution to this vulnerability. A grand strategic effort to diversify China's supply routes away from choke points controlled by hostile naval powers. The Sino-Iranian Railway is the crowning jewel of this strategy because it does something no amount of naval posturing can counter. It creates a fully overland energy corridor that does not transit a single nautical mile of water patrolled by the United States Navy. There is not a single American military base along the entire route from Xi'an to Tehran, not one aircraft carrier that can intercept these trains, not one submarine that can shadow them. The oil moves across the Eurasian landmass through sovereign territory, under the jurisdiction of nations that have precisely zero interest in enforcing Washington's unilateral coercive measures. But Tehran and Beijing have not stopped at the Xi'an-Tehran corridor alone. And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. While the main trunk line handles the bulk of the traffic, Iran has simultaneously been exploiting its northern geography along the Caspian Sea in ways that further dilute the blockade's effectiveness. Despite suffering damage to its port facilities at Bandar Anzali during the conflict, Tehran has kept 4 Caspian ports operating around the clock, receiving goods and raw materials from Russia.
If you're not using a business travel platform like Navan, you're really missing out. Hi, I'm Ellie, and I'm the People Operations Specialist.
And funneling them into the domestic economy. The Caspian route is not merely a one-way street for imports. It forms part of a broader multimodal network that can, when combined with the rail links running south from the Caspian littoral toward the Iranian plateau, offer additional pathways for moving hydrocarbons towards Central Asian railheads that then connect onward to China. The Caspian Sea is, after all, a massive inland body of water bordered by 5 nations, none of which, with the notable exception of Russia, which has its own reasons to defy American sanctions, have any incentive to assist Washington in policing Iranian trade. Iranian agricultural officials have been remarkably candid about this reality, stating publicly that the country's sheer size, nearly 6,000 kilometers of land, borders with 7 different nations, makes the notion of a total economic siege utterly fanciful. Goods flow in from Pakistan through 6 newly established land corridors, from Turkey through the Kapikoy-Razi border crossing, where Tehran is actively lobbying Ankara to increase the daily truck quota from 200 to 500 vehicles, and from Central Asian neighbors whose own economic interests are directly served by keeping these channels open. The result of all these overlapping circuits is that the catastrophic predictions emanating from Washington and the occupation entity, predictions of Iranian oil exports collapsing to zero, of Chinese industrial hubs grinding to a halt, of a desperate Tehran forced to capitulate on its sovereign nuclear rights, have simply not materialized. To be sure, the blockade has inflicted pain. The Iranian rial has depreciated significantly, import costs have risen, and the economy is under genuine strain. But pain is not the same as capitulation, and the notion that economic pressure alone would break the will of a nation of 90 million people with millennia of civilizational resilience was always a fantasy concocted in the fever dreams of regime change ideologues. What the rail corridor guarantees, what it has already demonstrably achieved, is that the complete economic asphyxiation that American strategists were counting on is simply not going to happen. Iran can still get its oil to its most important customer. China can still fuel its industrial base. And both nations can continue to look the architects of maximum pressure in the eye and tell them, in no uncertain terms, that the age of gunboat diplomacy is over. This is the deeper, more humiliating revelation for Washington that the rail link exposes. The structural impotence of sanctions as an instrument of geopolitical coercion in a world where alternative infrastructure already exists. The analysts at Foreign Policy magazine, not exactly a bastion of anti-American sentiment, have been forced to concede that oil sanctions no longer function as intended, that they redirect trade rather than stopping it, and that they have perversely benefited China by driving discounted barrels into its waiting refineries while expanding its influence over global energy markets. The Financial Times has published analyses showing that despite an estimated $1.9 trillion in economic losses inflicted on sanctioned nations, American oil sanctions have failed to alter Iranian or Russian policy in any meaningful way. What they have done instead is accelerate the very decoupling from dollar-denominated trade that Beijing has been pursuing for years. The rail transactions between China and Iran are settled in yuan, completely bypassing the SWIFT system from which Tehran was barred in 2012, and thus operating entirely outside the purview of American financial surveillance. Every container that rolls into Apran Dryport is a container that pays no tribute to the dollar hegemony upon which American global primacy ultimately rests. Let us also not forget the historical irony that makes this entire episode so delicious. The original Silk Road, the great overland trade network that connected Han China to Parthian and Sassanid Persia, was precisely the kind of transnational infrastructure that enabled civilizations to flourish independent of any single hegemonic power. When the maritime routes rose to dominance in the early modern period,
ESG stomach tightening. You've got questions, I've got answers. Okay, first question. What is ESG? ESG is the most...
They did so under the guns of European empires, and the control of sea lanes became synonymous with the control of global commerce. What the Belt and Road Initiative represents, and what the Sino-Iranian Railway embodies in its most tangible form, is nothing less than a 21st century reclamation of that ancient overland tradition, a deliberate rebalancing of the global logistical map away from the maritime choke points that the United States has spent 70 years militarizing. The Americans thought they could replay the gunboat diplomacy of the 19th century, parking warships off the coast of a sovereign nation and waiting for starvation to do the negotiating for them. What they forgot in their arrogance is that the map has changed. The railways have been laid. The gauge incompatibility between Chinese standard track and the Russian broad gauge used in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan has been managed through transshipment facilities and adjustable axle technology. The diplomatic groundwork has been laid through years of painstaking multilateral negotiation that brought Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Turkey to the table alongside China and Iran to harmonize customs procedures and streamline the flow of goods. The corridor is not a temporary workaround cobbled together in panic. It is the deliberate, long-planned product of strategic foresight that stands in stark contrast to the reactive, ham-fisted belligerence emanating from Washington. As we speak, the expansion plans are accelerating. The Six-Nation Agreement signed in November 2025 between China, Iran, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkey to develop the southern branch of the China-Europe Rail Corridor has taken on an entirely new urgency. The Five Nations Railway Corridor, a more ambitious proposal that would run from Kashgar in western China through Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan before connecting to the Iranian network at Kaf, is seeing feasibility studies fast-tracked, with the Afghan sections prioritized for completion as early as this year. This second route would shave roughly 1,000 kilometers off the existing alignment and, crucially, would bypass the Russian gauge territories entirely, using standard gauge track all the way from China to Iran and eventually onward to Turkey and the European continent. The Iranian Railways, the state-owned operator that oversees this network, has not been sitting idle. The Apron Dry Port alone is now capable of handling 30 trains and 1,000 trucks per day, with annual throughput projected to reach millions of tons in the near future. When you step back and look at the trajectory, what you see is not a temporary evasion of sanctions, but the permanent restructuring of Eurasian trade architecture, a shift as consequential in its own way as the opening of the Suez Canal or the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway. And it has all been catalyzed by the very blockade that was supposed to strangle it. The final bitter pill for Washington to swallow is that all of this is happening while the United States simultaneously pleads with China to use its influence over Tehran to secure a diplomatic resolution to the crisis. The absurdity of the American position would be comical if it were not so destructive. On the one hand, the United States imposes sanctions on Chinese companies, threatens secondary penalties against any entity that facilitates Iranian oil trade, and deploys naval forces to physically interdict maritime commerce. On the other hand, it asks Beijing to play the role of honest broker in negotiations that are designed to strip the Iranian nation of its sovereign rights and dignity. China has played this contradiction masterfully, publicly calling for restraint and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, while privately continuing to absorb Iranian crude at volumes that keep Tehran's economy afloat and its negotiating position intact. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi's visit to Beijing in early May, just ahead of the Trump-Xi meeting, was a clear signal that the strategic alignment between the two nations remains robust and that China has no intention of sacrificing its Iranian partnership on the altar of American geopolitical convenience.
They have a lot more confidence that they can endure it.
If you ever do want to prevent yourself and your private information from being out there on the internet all willy-nilly, and you want to protect
Taco Monday doesn't have the same ring to it as Taco Tuesday, but apparently the timing didn't work out as well for President Trump today, and we had it on Monday. Yesterday, after we were on the air here, President Trump posted on Truth Social again that I have been asked, I wasn't going to, but I have been asked by the Emir of Qatar, Prince of Saudi Arabia, and the President of the UAE to hold off on our planned military attack of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was scheduled for tomorrow, i.e. today. And he goes on to say a bunch of other stuff, and it's really all of it, anything that follows there.
Those are lies. All the Arabs came out and say they don't know what the hell he was talking about.
Actually, all of it. It's just a lot of nonsense. We've been here before. President Trump was allegedly getting close. Even in yesterday's show, we said, things could be moving down. We could be within 48-hour window potentially of returning to combat operations based on a lot of things that were going on. And then President Trump said, yeah, how about no hours? And this is not the first time this has happened. I mean, here's just a couple of them. This first one here on April 21st, Trump says the U.S. will extend its ceasefire with Iran at Pakistan's request because the period was going to come to an end and we're supposed to go back to combat operations. And President Trump says, you know what, because somebody else asked me, Pakistan in this case, I'm going to not go back to war because they said, recall, they said that we were really close to an agreement, that the Iranian side had agreed to nearly everything. And we just need a little more time. April 21st. Now here we are nearly a month later, still no deal. Then we had the short-lived in the early part of May, this operation Project Freedom, the operation moving things through the Strait of Hormuz, that barely lasted a day. And then he says, yeah, we're going to do that too, because again, somebody asked us to do it. And every time, somebody asked me to do something and to give peace a chance, and he keeps saying all this stuff about they're almost agreed to, they want peace, they're begging us for a deal. How many times have you heard that? And it's never been true. And it's not true now. In fact, it's people around the world are not buying this anymore. Even a lot of President Trump supporters are no longer buying this. I think some still are, but even that support is pretty tepid. They can see that it just means nothing. And when you talk all this nonsense, and have all these posts just rolling through his feed there about, how he's got a red button and he's about to fire some missiles and Space Force and being the captain of a ship attacking speedboats or blowing up stuff on the ground, you name it. All this stuff is nonsense because there's no reality to any of it. And I think that people are starting to come to an understanding of what's going on, that there is no military solution to this war. And the problem, it's said, not being the nuclear weapons issue, the problem being that Trump wants capitulation from Tehran. He wants regime change or regime submission like he got in Venezuela. That is his actual objective. Whether that is directly from from Tel Aviv, from Benjamin Netanyahu, or a joint decision, I don't know. Historians will tell us authoritatively that one day. They are definitely in it together. That much we know for certain. But their objective is that the capitulation or submission of the state of Iran, period. All this other stuff, about, it's about the long range weapons, it's about the proxies, it's about the nuclear dust, you name it. All that is just fodder for the public statements. The reality is it's about submission. Here's now the real problem. That's kind of the problem, what you want to happen. But the actual problem is that we now know for certain there is no military solution because everything that we have, we trotted it out in that first about 40 days. And there has been some chatter going on in some of the pro-war crew here these days, and some of the public mainstream media in the U.S. saying, look, we have recalibrated now. We have now more intelligence. We now know where all of these missile factories are, these underground situations. We know where the tunnels are and stuff for these underground speedboats. So we know more than we knew then, and we have more ammunition and more weapons than we had at the beginning of the 40 days. And this time, it's going to be different. That's what they're saying. The reality is, I'm going to throw the BS flag on that one. That's a 15-yard personal foul. You may know a little bit more incrementally. You would be foolish if you didn't. You would be incompetent if you didn't know more, because it should be a constant collection. But the fact is, we knew where all of these things, or the majority of them, were before. The problem isn't not knowing where they are. The problem is knocking them out. So you tell me, you don't have to be a military expert at all, just a common sense human being. If there is a facility that's buried deep within a granite mountain that's designed to endure a nuclear blast and continue to survive, and that you try for about 40 days, 20 times on one particular facility that's been reported publicly with conventional weapons, and you never succeeded at knocking it out, and they apparently have 33 of those lined up across their shoreline in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Now, if you couldn't knock it out with conventional weapons then, why do you think that you can throw more missiles of the same category at the same target, a mountain, and have a different result the next time? It's irrational, it's illogical, and it's foolish to try. And I think my guess is that the reason why Trump did this time is because enough of the military people are telling him, Mr. President, if you give that order, we'll launch them, we'll hit targets, and there's other things on the surface we can hit, and we can kill more people, but we can't get the ones that matter. We cannot take out a mountain with conventional weapons. We just don't have the wherewithal to do that. They're designed, just like our underground facilities are designed to endure much more than we have to put conventionally. Even nuclear weapons wouldn't work. So why does anyone think that a conventional weapon will do what it didn't do the first time? It won't. And I think President Trump is now figuring that out. The question is, where is he going to go now? It's interesting. He said this comment about, I was asked by the Gulf states here. Greg Carlstrom here, he's from The Economist. He's a writer for that. And he said several Gulf allies from some of the countries Trump mentioned said they were not aware of an imminent plan to attack Iran, he described. And one can imagine that they're also saying, and I don't remember that we asked you not to attack something that we didn't know was going to be attacked. You see what I'm saying here? Just like that, Pakistan asked me to not go back to war at the end of the alleged ceasefire period, or that all these other people asked me not to stop this, the Project Freedom. Every time he says that, the people on the ground are just scratching their head like, I don't know who he's talking about. So that shows you what the reality is. I just told you what the military reality is. But let's also take a look at the Iranian side here. But actually, no, before I get to that, there's one other thing here. Let me show you where President Trump's mind still is after this conversation and what he's still myopically focused on.
Other countries have come to me and they've said, we were getting ready to do a very major attack tomorrow. I've put it off for a little while, hopefully maybe forever, but possibly for a little while, because we've had very big discussions with Iran, and we'll see what they amount to. I was asked by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and some others if we could put it off for 2 or 3 days, a short period of time, because they think that they are getting very close to making a deal. And if we can do that where there's no nuclear weapon going into the hands of Iran, I think, and if they're satisfied, we will be probably satisfied also. We've informed Israel. We've informed other people in the Middle East that have been involved with us. And, it's a very positive development, but we'll see whether or not it amounts to anything. We've had periods of time where we thought pretty much getting close to making a deal, and didn't work out, but this is a little bit different. Now, we're ready going tomorrow, very big, and not something I wanted to do, but we have no choice because we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon.
It's just imprinted in his DNA, in his brain cells now that I suspect if someone asks him what he wants for lunch, he will say Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. There is no nuclear weapon. There never was a nuclear weapon. There wasn't a nuclear weapons program. They never had one. 47 years, they never had one. So there was no imminent threat from which he saved it. Just because there was no program, number one. Number two, the nuclear energy program that they did have and the reprocessing capabilities that they did have, which could have been escalated to nuclear weapons grade had they been left unattended, that was destroyed last year, or at least severely set back. Not completely destroyed, because you can't destroy the intellectual capacity, because they can replace literally everything and good if they wanted to, but so far they haven't. I have been surprised that they haven't done it now. I kind of thought that when this war started, that would have been the final blow, and that would have pushed them covertly to start actually making. I thought it would have made them run to a nuclear bomb as a means of deterrent. Several other experts we've had on our show say that actually even still, there's many in Iran that says, no, that still isn't in our advantage because it would cause a potential nuclear arms race, which would make their security even less than it is now. But with control of the Strait of Hormuz, that kind of acts as the nuke option without actually having the nuclear weapon issue. And so they don't need it right now. But one never knows if that's going to happen later on. But the bottom line is there isn't one now. So when you keep saying that you're predicating this whole war on something that doesn't exist, then you're also predicating getting out on something that doesn't exist, too, making it more difficult for us to withdraw. Now, Iran, I think, and just to show, we showed you just a couple of days ago, they again have reiterated we have no interest in having a nuclear weapon. And so at the government level, they're continuing to say that. So they said that's not on the table for us. So how can we take off or submit to something that isn't even on the table from our side? You see how it's making this more complicated. And then there's one other sound bite I wanted to play you from that interview here, where you see one other thing that President Trump is focused on, which also complicates the matter.
We're not going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon. So I was called by these three countries plus others, and they're dealing directly with our people and right now Iran. And there seems to be a very good chance that they can work something out. If we can do that without bombing the hell out of them, I'd be very happy.
No. There is no, we're about to make a deal. We're not really close, and they're working with this. They're not. The only thing the Iranian side has done, and they have reiterated here recently, they have reiterated it after this statement, some of which I'm going to show you in a second, is here are conditions for your surrender. We'll negotiate those. We'll talk to you about those, but that's where we are. That's what we're willing to negotiate about. So when President Trump says there's a deal close at hand, the only deal that could be close at hand is if we submitted to all of the terms that the Iranians have set. And that is, we withdraw from the region, we pay war reparations, they retain control of the Strait of Hormuz, and frozen assets are released, and they still be able to have their relations with their proxies. They still say that they're not going to do a nuclear weapon. Even then, they say that. But they also say this reprocessed material, that is our sovereign right as a country, as the signatory of the NPT, and we're going to keep all to that. We'll figure that out too. So basically, you get nothing that you want other than no nuclear weapon. So I guess in that sense, there is something on there. But to get to that point, to get a negotiated end to where both sides would stop the fighting, would require the U.S. to do that, because I think that the Iranian side realizes that time is on their side, that they, if it goes back to conflict, they will suffer much more. As every day this blockade is on, they're suffering more. They're having high unemployment. They're having a lot of inflation. I mean, it's really causing a lot of problems, but they've been down this path before. They have experience and haven't endured this for a long period of time. We're barely 2 months in, barely even started. They can go a lot longer. But when you look at the global energy markets and you look at the price of oil, let me see today, last I checked, it was 108. So even with President's quote taco, this time it didn't fall down. In fact, it might not have fallen down by any at all. That's how his words are no longer having the effect. You remember the last time he said this, it was a 9% drop. It went huge down, like $9 a drop for a period of time. Now that even the markets are starting to see there's no reality to this. So then the question is, where are we going to go? What is next? Well, let me show you. I showed you what President Trump thinks. Let's see what some of the regional allies think. And let's start first with the University of Tehran professor who's out front along with Professor Marandi, whom we thought our show is Professor Azidi, who kind of laid out how Iran's viewing this.
This is the 5th time that Trump is doing this. Last time he did this was on May 5th. A day earlier, he had announced that he would do Operation Project Freedom, escorting ships. And then he canceled that idea of it in 24 hours. And I think the main reason, last time he said Pakistanis asked him to do that. I think the main reason, the main problem is that there are no military solutions to this conflict. He did that for about 37 days, bombing Iran with full force. He had Israelis helping him, killing a lot of people, more than 3,500 civilians. And then he didn't achieve much except killing a lot of people. And then he has this problem of the Strait of Hormuz not being open the way he wants it open.
Yeah, and that is a problem there. So you see, that's again, that's not an official, but that's somebody who's in contact with the senior government, because obviously they want Professor Marandi out there to an English language speaking public to be able to say, here's our view. Now, again, like we say with all the stuff, to include with the Americans, I take nobody at face value, but we must listen to them to see what they're saying there and then compare that with reality on the ground. And when we do that, then the views of the U.S. side and the Israeli side and the Iranian side, the one that comes a lot closer to looking like what we see on the ground in reality, unfortunately, is the Iranian side. Now, that's from somebody who's not directly in the government. Let's see who is in the government at the highest levels. This was right about the time. I don't remember if this came out just before or just after President Trump issued that Truth Social yesterday, but this is President Pezeshkian, who says, we will never bow our heads to any power under any circumstances. And we engage in dialogue, but with dignity. And then several other kind of things are to the importance of unity, et cetera. But the bottom line is that he's saying, we're not going to negotiate under any kind of freedom. We're not going to bow the knee to anyone under pressure, meaning if you come back with this military stuff, we will endure it, but we will still not bow. And that is someone who, when you've already hit somebody with your best shot and they're still standing, now then they have a lot more confidence that they can endure it again because they know what it is, they know what it looks like. And of course, we're primarily so far have gone after their military sites like these mountains, et cetera, because that's where the missiles are they use to control the Strait of Hormuz and to attack everybody in the region. So that was one of the primary targets, even more so than the so-called nuclear program, because that was the one that they could use to harm people. We can't do it. Iranians see we can't do it. So they have been validated that their plans for a couple of decades have borne fruit, and they see that we can't take that fruit from them. So now then the question is, how willing is the side that recognizes that you're not going to be able to take away its ace and you want them to give away everything? And there's no way that they're going to do that. A couple of others here. This is from the ISNA, the Iranian news agency, who's saying that, the iron fist of the powerful armed forces in the great Iranian nation will force them to retreat and surrender. So you see, it's going beyond now. We're not going to bow the knee to anybody, to now then they're a little bit more cocky and saying, actually, we're asking for your surrender. And as I told you, the terms that they've given amount to a surrender and a acknowledgement that the war failed. Not just that it didn't succeed, but that it outright failed, and that they're asking for our surrender. Their army, this is just this morning here, Army spokesman, if this is the official Iranian army, not the IRGC, they have separate sort of branches of the military. If the enemy is foolish enough to fall into the Israelis' trap and launch another aggression, we will open new fronts against them with new methods. And there's been a number of things that have been talked about what that could be. There's supposition of some new categories of missiles. There was even some claims on some X post the other day or yesterday that they might even have ICBMs that can actually hit targets in America. I doubt that, because those are some things you have to do a lot of missile testing to validate that the platforms can go that far, unless they were given some by either China or Russia. I guess that's a possibility, but it is pretty likely that they have some things that we don't know about, some things that could actually be used against us. But the more important thing is that the new target set, because we know that the existing missile inventory, which certainly has continued to grow in the days since the ceasefire was formed, first signed in April, you're sure that because they have their manufacturing capacity underground where it can't be knocked out from the sky. So the likelihood is to continue on. You've seen a lot of the stuff from CNN, from New York Times, Washington Post, all of whom have said their analysis shows that there is a substantially larger percentage of the Iranian missile program than we ever thought before, like around 75% or so. That's probably a good number. It seems pretty reasonable that it is. That's one of the things it's plausible based on what we have physically observed. Therefore, they can hit what they shoot at. Whatever you have with air defense interceptor missiles, that whatever percentage is actually getting through, we claim 90%. Professor Ted Postel on our show says it's more like 5%. Who knows what the right number is, but what we know for an absolute fact, validated, is that whatever the number that gets through, it is pinpoint accurate. Therefore, when they say that they will next go after energy infrastructure and oil facilities and the production facilities, not just the storage tanks, but the facilities to actually process crude oil, get it shipped out, etc., pipelines, all this, desalination plants, that's the biggest danger, the biggest risk. because with that's probably more important than oil. The oil is for your economy. That water, your people won't live if they don't have it in sufficient quantities, and it will be really hard to get that much water in for any country that they knock out, the Iranian side knocks out. But that's what they're saying. They say we will hit all of those things, to include our ally Israel, along with the other GCC countries, and further hit American bases, they say. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to put Iran to the test when they have validated and demonstrated the capacity to do exactly what they've said? And it's so far, when they have said they were going to do something in retaliation to something we have launched, they have done that. They've made other claims about things that they have done. They claim to have blown up a bunch of our ships and hit a bunch of damaged stuff. And at least so far, we haven't seen any actual evidence of that. And they've claimed a lot of it. So that may not be true. And again, we have to validate what we can know on the ground. And so far, we don't have any actual evidence that those attacks were actually hit home, that a ship was actually damaged and hit by missile fire or rated missile fire. But when they have said what they're going to do if they get hit, yeah, man, they followed through. And so that's something that we need to really pay attention to. Let's take a look at one other thing here, because that's what the Iranian side is saying. I just showed you what President Trump has said here. Now, who do you think is the most unhappy today because President Trump made that statement yesterday? Well, Israel. Okay, fair enough. Probably Israel's the biggest unhappy because we know that they want this to go on. But the other problem is his allies. I saw it yesterday afternoon, a short clip on Fox News. I don't have that one to show you here. But even some of his stalwart supporters, I think Britt Hume was one of them, and they were not happy. I mean, they were a little bit perplexed, and they have a hard time even voicing displeasure. They love to do that full-throated cheerleading stuff, and they were taken a little bit back because they're like saying, hey, we can't do this, and because we can't leave without having that nuclear weapon program knocked out or getting that dust back, because he said that was non-negotiable, and this ain't going to get it there. So they were a little bit muted in their criticism, but not all that much. So it still is a problem. But now then, let me show you. Oh, well, no, let me put this up here first. This is what Lindsey Graham has posted, and believe me, this is a shot across the bow too. As I've said previously, this is his X post yesterday. As I've said previously, any agreement reached between the United States and Iran must come before the Congress for approval, as was the case under the JCPOA. By the way, it wasn't. That's why Obama did it with executive order. That's why Trump could just undo it with an executive order. So he's wrong there. But he is saying this one would have to come through Congress for approval because that gives him veto power over it. So he's telling the president pretty straightforwardly that if I don't like these terms, me and my Senate colleagues, we're not going to pass this, and you're going to be stuck like Obama having to do an executive deal, an executive order, even if you get agreement on the Iranian side. He continues, if we can end the conflict through diplomatic means and achieve our national security objectives, i.e. their complete surrender, that would be a major accomplishment. But as I've said before, President Trump's position is clear. So now he's trying to say, now this is your deal, remember, and I agree with it. No enrichment. American control of the highly enriched uranium. Opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran must abandon long-range missile programs. Iran must end its support for all terrorist proxies in the region. In other words, that is absolute surrender. So you have the Iranian side saying that we'll have a negotiated settlement as long as you surrender to all of our maximalist terms. And then you have Lindsey Graham saying, we'll end the war on diplomatic means as long as you surrender to all of our diplomatic or all of our demands and abjectly surrender. Nobody's willing to do that. Therefore, there is no room for negotiation. President Trump is either lied or greatly deceived when he said in that Truth Social, we're really close to an agreement, because you couldn't have been farther away. We've never been farther away since this war started, which is saying something because we were always far apart since the war started. Remember, we were really close and should have had a deal 2 days before the war started, but we threw that in the trash. More on that another day. But in terms of where we are now, this is as far as we've been, and everybody's digging in. Now, the question is, where are we going to go from here? Now, Robert Gates, former Secretary of Defense, who's never been a big Trump supporter, is kind of playing wishy-washy here, but just kind of also showing you where other groups are in the United States in terms of this war and the issue of the nuclear weapons program when he said this.
I don't think that the nuclear program in Iran poses an imminent threat. After all, we bombed it twice. The nuclear material is pretty deeply buried. You'd have to spin up, use the centrifuges to spin it from 60% enriched to over 90% enriched. The centrifuges are very sensitive. They're also mostly destroyed. Many of their nuclear scientists have been killed. So I don't think this is not a problem for tomorrow, but it does, the president's got it right in terms of this is a long-term threat that cannot be allowed to develop.
So you see, he's kind of playing both sides, which is Robert Gates wasn't bad as Secretary of Defense. I had a number of problems with him. I was glad that he canceled the Future Combat System, for example, because he saw it just wasn't working. So at least he had the courage to do that, but he was kind of waffly on some other things. Here's kind of another one. He's like, well, there wasn't really an imminent threat that President Trump said. After all, we bombed it twice, et cetera. So he just said right there, said it was the fraudulent start of war, but he's kind of wishy-washy about it. I just want him to be direct and say, this is the truth, but he's wishy-washy about it. But then he kind of waffles back in the other direction and says, yeah, but I mean, he kind of has a point, President Trump, because, they can't have a nuclear weapon. Mr. Gates, they didn't have a nuclear weapon. They didn't have a nuclear weapons program. And if you want them to never go to one, then quit freaking being their perpetual enemy for 47 years and trying to economically destroy them and now trying to physically destroy them. Going back to 2010 with a lot of the Stuxnet and some of the other kind of subterranean ways, if you will, that we tried to get the cyber attacks, those kinds of things. And then the assassination campaigns that Israel launched against their scientists and a bunch of other stuff. And then the physical attacks that started with their embassy in Syria, and then the assassinations in Tehran, and then our assassination of Soleimani in 2020. Every time we keep doing more and more and more provocative action, giving them more reason to hate us and to resist us. And still, with all of those things, even through Operation Midnight Hammer, they still did not have a nuclear weapons program. Now, how much less likely are they to get one if we just start treating them like a normal country? And as long as you don't attack me, I'm not going to attack you. That's still possible. I mean, there's forget about trust. That's not going to happen. I could be elected president tomorrow, and even with my history of trying to be a straight shooter and my avowed statement that I'm going to do the right thing here, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe anybody with an American flag, because we have ruined it, not just with President Trump, but going all the way back to virtually every administration, even the Obama administration, as much as it did. And I give it credit to this day for coming up with the JCPOA. Even then, we didn't exactly honor our word in what we were supposed to do on our side of that, even during his administration, much less afterwards. But we can live in peaceful coexistence. We can have stable relations that don't have them causing, attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz. It's probably also going to be a long time before we can get them to wrest control of it to where they don't charge this fee for passing through, because of our actions. Actions have consequences, folks. We teach this to our children, but somehow when you become an adult and get elected to the Senate, House, or White House, somehow you think the rules don't apply. They do. And this is a graphic explanation of why. And so now this is stuff because of our previous behavior, we're going to be paying for decades. The best thing that we can do is to get this off the table now as rapidly as possible and start rebuilding trust, which will take years, if not decades, of consistent, honest integrity being displayed in our behavior, words and behavior lining up. But we can't even get to that mythical place if we don't take step one. That's what I'm arguing for. Let's get this war over with by whatever means. President Trump, forget about the taco. Just get this off the board. Claim victory. Just say, oh yeah, we destroyed them, set them back 2 decades, whatever. He said a lot of this stuff before. Put that into effect. Let's get this war off the table. Withdraw our forces from the region. Get them out of harm's way. Iran will do what it's going to do. It will crow. You can't stop them from doing any of that. But we can stop ourselves from losing any more money, from losing any more men, from losing any more facilities, and from the flow of oil turning into a catastrophic shortfall and loss with the global economy that's going to happen if we don't get this thing back open, whatever it means. It's going to happen. It can't be any other way. That's just how the system is designed. We need to get this thing over with, and we need to get it over with today. Thank you very much, folks.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Hai Fong. I am joined by good friends of the show, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson and Larry Johnson. Gentlemen, good to see you again. All right.
Good to be with you, even if you are a hot buddy.
Good to be with you as well, to both of you. Well, how about we get started with how the story is being written right now on the Iran front. So as the story goes from the U.S. side, Donald Trump had ordered an attack that was supposed to happen today or tomorrow. And as he ordered the attack, Donald Trump claims that Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia picked up their phones, told Donald Trump to wait just a minute, do not attack, because Iran is going to be ready to negotiate. You should delay this fact. And so New York Times wrote this. They said that Trump threatens Iran and then pulls back all on the same day. He was a little early to Taco Tuesday. And in this, and I'll pull it up and I'll get your reaction to it, Larry. Sorry, wrong article. Wrong picture. I'll get to that later.
I'll just preempt it and say it's a lie, but I'll explain why it's a lie.
Yeah. So here's the article. It says Trump threatens Iran and then pulls back all on the same day. And in this, though, they cite a U.S. military official who actually says that rather than it being the Gulf convincing Donald Trump not to do this, it was actually Iran's military capabilities and the fact that they had been able to track U.S. military operations, including their air operations, with more accuracy and thus more lethality, meaning fighter jets could be coming down. So, Larry, how about you help us understand what exactly has happened here? Because it seems like there's just panic erupting on all fronts, despite Trump's confidence that he can hit Iran any day, anytime.
Well, there's a couple of things have to be in place before there's any military action. One, so over the weekend, Pentagon issued the stop movement order. So that is a precursor that, okay, there is going to be offensive action. But the one that will trigger that that it's coming down the pike is when the CENTCOM issues what's called air tasking orders, ATOs, when you start using the acronyms. There haven't been any ATOs issued yet. So that's why I said, this notion that he was ready to attack yesterday, that's complete nonsense. It's just a lie. They weren't ready to attack. The determinant, the one country that will determine whether or not the United States carries out a military strike is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia right now is hosting the KC-135 air refuelers. They're based at Prince Saud Air Base, just outside of Riyadh. And why is that important? Well, most of the combat aircraft, the F-35s in particular, are based over in Jordan and Israel, is my understanding. So they have a combat radius of 550 miles. Maybe if they got a light load, they can get 600 miles, but between 500 and 600 miles. Okay, guys, look at your map. Ladies and gentlemen, look at your maps. Look at where Mawafaq al-Salti Air Base is in Jordan, just outside of the capital. And then go over to Riyadh. That's over 800 miles. Okay, that means those planes are going to have to be refueled even before they get within 300 miles of Riyadh. And then from there, they fly, they finish the other 300 miles to Riyadh, and they can just pass Riyadh. They could launch a Tomahawk or a JASSM missile into Iran. And then they've got to be immediately refueled. So these planes to operate, each F-35 is going to need at least probably minimum of 4 air refuelings just to stay in the air and be able to get back to the home base. So this is why these air refuelers forward position there in Saudi Arabia are critical. Now, we saw 2 weeks ago when Trump announced Project Freedom that was going to also use combat aircraft to so-called open up the strait. It got shut down within 36 hours because the Saudis said, nope, not using our space. Kuwaiti said, us too, we're with them. And Trump gets on the phone with MBS, and MBS basically tells him to go pound sand. So like I said, we'll see where we stand right now. I do know that there are extensive efforts underway by the Chinese and the Russians in terms of trying to erect this new security architecture in the Persian Gulf involving Turkey, the Saudis, and Iran. I'm waiting to. I have a source who's able to provide information out of Pakistan from most senior levels. So the Pakistanis are very much in touch with both the Saudis and the Iranians, particularly with the Saudis. They have a mutual defense pact with them. So we'll get an idea if in fact, if the Saudis say, no, you're not using our territory, then Trump's options are really, really limited at that point.
Yeah, great points. And Colonel Wilkerson, before I get your comments, I'll just read this short bit from the New York Times talking about this ordered attack, pullback situation, Taco Tuesday. The official warned that the downing of the F-15E fighter jet last month and the ground fire that struck an F-35 revealed that American flight tactics have become too predictable in ways that allowed Iran to defend against them more capably. Perhaps most important, the U.S. military official said that while 5 weeks of intensive bombing may have killed several Iranian leaders and commanders, the war has left a more hardened, resilient adversary. So your thoughts about what's just gone on here, Colonel Wilkerson?
Well, this must be very embarrassing to an Air Force chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I can only imagine. Something I picked up on this morning, I think it's accurate, and it comes from a number of sources, one of them Reuters. Yesterday, Pakistan deployed 8,000 troops and a squadron of fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, as Larry was saying. The deployment was confirmed this morning, at least as far as I could tell. And I'm asking myself, this is a squadron of 16 aircraft, mostly JF-17 fighters. And I'm asking myself, are these deployed to protect Saudi Arabia from the United States? Or are these deployed in some way to change the balance with regard to the Iran-U.S. war, Iran-Israel-U.S. war? Mm-hmm. And if so, in what direction? Especially with regard to Israel. And are the troops that are being deployed along with them, according to the report, for the same purpose? Are they for protecting the Saudis? And if they're for protecting the Saudis, and as Larry indicated, there is a growing relationship between both Turkey and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, against whom? My guess would be you can flip a coin on that. The United States, under certain circumstances where we barge in, but I can't figure out any other reason than to honor their relationship with Saudi Arabia, which is new and growing, but also to send a signal, perhaps, like I'm describing. Whom are you defending against, and who are you protecting the Saudis against? If I were Pakistan, I think I'd be very circumspect about the way I determine that. I'm not so sure about Mohammed bin Salman because I think he's already made his decisions, and maybe we'll see them here. As to the agreement, as such as it is, the word that came out this morning, early this morning, is that there is no agreement whatsoever in terms of the negotiations. The Iranians have claimed you wanted to talk about the nuclear. We refused to talk about the nuclear. We said, well, then that's tough. We'll talk about it with bombs. That's a direct quote from a senior official. So where are we? Going to resume the war, but Trump doesn't know when and doesn't know how. And he doesn't really want to. And meanwhile, we've got the Israeli ambassador to the United States making such egregious statements as J Street is a cancer in the Jewish community in America. And we've got Tom Massey being absolutely floored with Jewish money, millions and millions of dollars trying to defeat him. Man, where are we? Who's mounting the influence, and in what direction, and what's he going to produce? I have no idea at this point. I think that Trump doesn't want to go back to war, but I think he wants to go back to war. So, toss the coin.
Yeah, and the Wall Street Journal reports, Larry, that I guess following on what Colonel Wilkerson was saying, that these Gulf countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, the officials, anonymous officials within their regimes are saying they had no idea that Donald Trump was going to strike at the moment he said he was going to strike. So it kind of throws hot water on this idea that they were the ones who pulled him back. What's your comments on this? Because he's done this before too. It wasn't too long ago where I feel like he was talking about delaying strikes because of the Gulf countries.
Well, the reality was in the initial strike on the 28th of February that the Saudis, despite claims, prior public claims to the contrary, that they were opposed to this, they were absolutely supportive of it. So they knew that was coming. They made the bet that the United States could deliver on its promise to protect them because the U.S. had deployed Patriot missile batteries and well as some THAADs to the area. So they were all operating on the assumption that the United States could deliver on its promise to protect them. Well, that turned out to be bullshit. Yeah. And as a result, Saudi Arabia suffered some fairly significant damage, not as bad as what Qatar really took it in the shorts because the destruction of that $1 billion plus radar at Al Udeid, along with several other radar systems. And there was one other that's $1 billion, and I don't know if that was in Kuwait or in Saudi Arabia, but that got taken out.
One in Bahrain, too.
It was a Bahrain?
Yeah, there was one there. I don't know if it was additional to what you just said or.
Yeah, so I mean, but there were at least 5 or 6 different radar systems that were all there integrated for air defense. And man, once those were wiped out, there goes the air defense. And it got to the point where some of these radars would be just taken out by drones. They're leisurely flying along and then boom. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for the Saudis, which then, as I mentioned earlier, we saw 2 weeks ago when they put the kibosh on Operation Project Freedom. So what I don't know right now is whether the Saudis are going to hold firm to that and that they've made their decision. Okay, we're now going forward, going to put our trust and reliance on the Chinese and the Russians to assure that we're not going to be attacked. And, part of that assurance comes that they won't have to worry about the entire premise of having U.S. troops forward deployed was to attack Iran. And it was all based upon a lie, a false assumption that Iran was intending to attack those countries, which it was not. It never has. It was only after those countries allowed themselves to be used as a springboard for attacks in Iran that Iran turned around and said, okay, guys, you're going to pay the price. Now, the other outlier here is the United Arab Emirates. They're not. They're not critical. The two countries that are responsible for most of the critical commodities. We're talking oil. That's Saudi Arabia. They're the majority distributor of that. Liquid natural gas. That's Qatar. They're the major distributor of that. Sulfur. That's primarily the Saudis. And then helium and urea. That comes out of Qatar. So between those two countries, in terms of the economic impact on the world, they're critical. Now, Qatar is hurting the most because some of its infrastructure is so damaged, it may be years before it recovers the ability to produce that, which means the world is facing some global shortages for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
But it looks like both the Saudis and Qataris have come to the point that, you know what, going with the United States, that brings too much heat. They can't protect us. Yeah, it's like the mafia shows up at your pizza parlor. Hey, you need to buy some insurance so your pizza parlor doesn't catch on fire. Capiche? So, you pay the money. Next month, your pizza parlor burns down. And you go back to the guy and say, hey, I paid you this money. And go, oh, our bad. We didn't have control over that. That's essentially what's happened here. The United States offered protection money. They paid up. They bought U.S. weapons. They bought U.S. Treasury bills. They let the U.S. come base troops there. And bam, they get punched in the nose. They got a bloody nose. And they're saying, wait a second, this wasn't supposed to happen. So I think there's a reevaluation of the relationship with the United States underway right now.
And the absolutely shameful behavior of the U.S. military of running away to hotels and civilian areas in order to avoid the very attack that it was the U.S. that ordered to avoid the retaliation for their own attack. Colonel Wilkerson, there's a mystery though that's been going on in the region that
Only
I wanted
one?
your comment on. Well, every single day, have you noticed, and this goes to both of you, there have been reports by the UAE, there's been one by Saudi Arabia, but it seems like every day the UAE in particular, this is the Ministry of Defense, is talking about that there are drones, hostile drones, being fired at them. This time 6 in the past 48 hours, and they cite the nuclear energy plant on May 17th that was hit initially. Not a lot of damage being done by these drones, but no word about who's firing them. And, it was when it first began blaming Iran. Okay, Iran is doing this. But now the UAE has even backed off on that. They're just saying it's coming from the western border area, and they don't know who did it. They're investigating who did it. So any idea about what's going on here? Is this a way to try to provoke the war to restart? It doesn't seem like it's doing a very good job. But Colonel Wilkerson, to you, and then Larry, if you have any thoughts.
Well, my first guess would be Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Very first guess. Second and third guess, too. Anything they can do to stir the pot. Meanwhile, there was a report in Haaretz this morning that the IDF was quoted. I don't know who it was. It sounded like it was a more senior guy. As let me get this straight. We are on risky, pointless missions in broad daylight and shouldn't be here. This is the IDF senior officer leadership in Lebanon. And I don't blame them for saying that. I saw the stats yesterday on Netanyahu put a clamp on because we could get into the IDF itself and find out post-traumatic stress, suicides, desertions, and absent without leave. We could find all of that out. But now, as I understand why it's dried up, Netanyahu has said no more. You can't reveal that data anymore. Well, we were hearing yesterday that all of those categories are skyrocketing and that they have real problems in terms of keeping manning the forces that are in southern Lebanon. So you got these kind of comments, you got those kinds of comments, or reality, I think, of the situation. In other words, you got another July 2006 or another 1982 in Lebanon for the IDF. They're getting whomped, in short. And you got all the rest of this going on. And so Netanyahu's getting a little bit desperate. I think he's doing all manner of things. And that's the reason I said what I said about the drones, to stir the pot and to make sure that, one, Trump doesn't leave and continues this conflict and fulfills his ultimate dream. And two, that there's not an untoward political situation, which looks like it might be building in Israel right now for himself personally. So look for anything coming out of Israel right now to exacerbate this situation in any way they possibly can.
How about you, Colonel Wilkerson? I mean, Larry. Sorry about that. Back to Colonel.
I got promoted to 06. Okay, cool. No, look, let me make a commentary about the casualties from these kinds of wars that don't normally show up. So over the weekend, I was serving as the chief range safety officer for a shooting event that was for veterans, and I had 10 assistant RSOs. One of them, a guy named Tank. He was a Navy corpsman that served with the Marines, and he's been one of my students. And another one of my students, a kid named Jamie Lee Sclatter, he too was a Navy corpsman, but he was trained by the Marines as a sniper. And Jamie, he wanted to become an NRA rifle instructor, and so to do that, he had to take the basic rifle course, and so that's where I first met him. And when I asked him about his experience, he downplayed it. He didn't say, "Oh, I was a Marine Corps sniper, and I don't know why I'm taking a course from you," which he would have been fully entitled to say. But we went through the course, and then at the end, he revealed what his real experience was, and I, began. He's 43 years old, and as I tell these guys, I said, if you're under 45, you're one of my kids, okay? But I gave him a hard time, but just a humble guy, competent, very kind, and as a corpsman, he spent more time saving lives and taking lives. Anyway, so Tank and I were involved with this shooting event on Sunday, and we said goodbye to each other, and I'm in the car for like 5 minutes, and all of a sudden my phone lights up and it's Tank, and he's crying because we just learned Jamie committed suicide on Sunday. Now, as I started looking into this, we've had 147,000 soldiers, sailors, and Marines kill themselves since the start of this global war on terror 25 years ago.
Yep.
That number is bigger. It's bigger than we only lost 110,000 Marines in World War II in the Pacific War, Marines and Army in the Pacific battles, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima. We got more than that have died from suicide, and the deaths from suicide exceed those that have died since in Vietnam, in Iraq, and 2 engagements in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Somalia. Go down the list. All the damn wars we fought since 1960 haven't even matched up to the total of these casualties we continue to take because of the emotional trauma inflicted on these soldiers. And it's a fucking outrage. And it is the kind of thing that these people in political positions who issue these commands, they never pay the price. And I am furious about it. But you know what? Same things happening in Israel. Their suicide rates going up because you still have people there with a conscience that realize they've murdered women and children, and they can't live with themselves because of that.
Let me throw this on top of that, Danny. The number of homeless veterans is almost as high as the number that Larry's just suggested is the suicide rate. I mean, and we have a president who is commander-in-chief and who gives absolutely no regard to any of these things at all.
Yeah.
Well, he says it publicly twice. Double down on it that he doesn't take into consideration even the general population's financial situations when he's considering what he's going to do about war, and particularly war with Iran. And it's certainly having massive costs, and certainly a major cost of these wars is the U.S. can stave off the massive casualties that it imposes on, at least deaths that it imposes on other countries, but the costs are still incredibly high for those who come back, who survive these wars of aggression that they're ordered to undertake. Definitely. There's no doubt about this. And maybe I can get your guys' comment on this. You know, the New York Times, I don't know if you saw, Donald Trump said that it was treasonous for New York Times, CNN, anyone in the so-called fake news media now to talk about Iran being victorious. Meanwhile, New York Times seems to not have gotten the memo, because as this strike was being pulled back, they published this analysis about how Iran would respond to renewed strikes. And what they say is that Iran could continuously, perhaps given what they've been able to do since the ceasefire as well, fire hundreds of missiles per day at Gulf energy infrastructure, refineries, ports, water desalination plants, and including as well to shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And now all of this that the New York Times is reporting is simply coming from reports that they've read, like people just like us who go and read Iranian media and Iranian statements and what they say. And that's basically what they're citing. So how much of this has to do with Trump's hesitation to go back into the war, not least also the additional factor of this burgeoning economic crisis? I've seen some economists say we're about weeks away from a global recession that some of our friends, like Professor Marandi, is like could be a Great Depression. Whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in and tell you that I think one of the reasons we're seeing great trepidation within the other Gulf countries is just what you pointed out. There's so many other ramifications, but that's one of them. The second tier, as I've called it, of targets that Iran has in its sights, if you will, and plenty of missiles to hit, fast ballistic missiles, plenty of other ordnance that they can expend in the wake of those missiles, because they've been very good at coordinating the really modern high velocity stuff with the low velocity cheap stuff, drones primarily. And they could rip through the region, hitting Ras Tanura, Zonia, Eunice, all those other places where it, as Larry just pointed out, it's absolutely critical for Saudi Arabia. I mean, you could take down 7 to 20% of their oil capacity and it would be down for months. When we did that in China in the petroleum disruption exercise, Ras Tanura, for example, at the time, which was much more productive then than it is now, but it was down for over 6 months. So you took a huge capacity down, and you don't really have the capacity to shift around like we did in that exercise, other than from maybe Russia, maybe the United States. But why would they want to do that if they're making a big profit? Maybe eventually the global recession / depression would force them into that sort of thing. But this would be really traumatic for the region and for the globe if Iran were forced by the circumstances it's in now to hit this second tier of targets, and if they hit it with the devastation that they hit the first tier. And I think they would. I think they'd be just as accurate, they'd be just as devastating, and they'd be 10 times more impactful on the world. And you threw the Bab el-Mandeb in there, that too, and the Houthis have already shown that they can close that for all practical purposes, which are the only ones that matter. So we're looking at a real global problem unless Trump wakes up. And when he wakes up, he's got to hit Bibi over the head and put him out. And I don't see that happening. I just don't see that happening any more than I see, though I hate to say it, Tom Massey beating this massive, massive Jewish Israeli combination of money pouring into his campaign that probably surpasses anything we've ever seen in a House of Representatives campaign in the history of the country.
Yeah, you know, the we're dealing with a real disconnect between the markets, commodity markets, oil markets, financial markets, and what's actually going on in the world. Go back to the COVID epidemic and what happened to the price of oil during that period. The price of oil per barrel went up over $120, and there wasn't an actual shortage. I mean, the production, the oil wells were still pumping, the infrastructure of the oil wells was still intact, and yet the market reacted, oh my God, and they pretended like there was going to be this incredible shortage. And again, even that analysis didn't make sense, because if people were staying at home and they weren't traveling to work, the demand for actual oil was going to go down, not up. So the market should have behaved in a different way, and it didn't. Now we're seeing actual shortages. I mean, disruption of at least 20%, if not higher, of the world supply of oil. And that supply has been cut off. So we're dealing now with a 20% reduction that is not, you can't just turn it around in a day. If oil production returns somehow magically to what it was on February 27th, you'd still be looking to 6 to 8 weeks of shortages. And what's the price of oil doing? It's up a little bit, $110, $111. It's not accurately reflecting what should be out there, the number one. Then the combination of these commodities that have been disrupted out of the Persian Gulf, when you look at the combination of urea and sulfur, they are critical for making fertilizer, critical. Helium, critical for computer chips. 44% of the world's supply comes out of the Persian Gulf and is not coming out now. And so what are they saying? Oh, there's a possibility of a recession? Horse shit. It's underway. I mean, for God's sake, we sit here and deceive ourselves, lie to ourselves, that if we'll be lucky if we get away with a recession, because the recession is already underway. The real question is it going to be a depression?
Yep.
Now, within this, the argument's made that, oh, well, the United States, it's our economy. We've got this strength and we can withstand some of this. Sorry, boys and girls, that's another lie you're being sold. The pillars of the U.S. hegemony, its control, its ability to be the economic leader of the world, has hinged on two things. One is the petrodollar, that everybody's going to buy oil, have to use dollars. And the second is everybody's got these foreign countries will buy our treasury bills so we can continue to spend like a drunken sailor at a whorehouse in Manila. And instead, what's actually going on? We're seeing that on the petrodollar front, China, Russia, Iran, major either buyers or suppliers of oil, they're selling now in alternative currencies, particularly the yuan. So if you're looking at it, the U.S. market with petrodollars is shrinking. It's not increasing, and it's not staying steady. It is shrinking. Maybe it's not shrinking very fast, but it's still contracting. How about U.S. treasuries? Ditto. The countries that used to buy, China, Japan, even Europe, they're now they're selling off their treasuries. They're not buying any new treasuries. And people say, well, this has happened in the past. Never in the past have you had the economy of the United States where it is dependent upon continuing to sell these treasuries to other people, because our debt is now approaching $40 trillion. And that's been accelerating over the last 16 months. When Donald Trump took office, it was 37 trillion. Within the end of the year, it was 38 trillion. Within another 77 days, it ticked up to over 39.2 trillion. And I bet you by the end of June, we're going to be looking at $40 trillion. So when you put all that together, these are not happy notes for an economy that's, oh, we're doing well. We're not doing well. And the contractions that's coming as this cascade of effects from the shortages, not just of liquid natural gas and oil, but of the urea, of the sulfur, of the helium. I mean, sulfur, which goes to make so many different things, is critical in so many different industrial processes that there's a holdup. So, we keep sitting around and deceiving ourselves, pretending that never mind, remain calm, all is good. Meanwhile,
Larry, S&P is doing very well.
Yeah. Just, it's one lie after another.
Meanwhile, just to add to the gloom, Putin just announced, or the Russian Ministry of Defense just announced, that the armed forces will be engaged in a very large-scale strategic nuclear exercise that runs through May the 21st. The drill involves the Strategic Missile Forces, the Northern and Pacific Fleets, the Long Range Aviation Command, and a part of the forces of the Leningrad and Central Military Districts. Fast down to another Reuters report, Lithuania wants to allow NATO nukes on its territory.
Yeah.
And then down to another one, you'll see that Kane is over there telling the Poles that they're not going to get the troops that they were going to get. What the hell are we doing in Europe? I know what Putin's doing. Putin has decided, I think, and rightfully so, probably given the evidence he has, he's going to have to go to war with NATO.
Yeah.
And he's preparing for it.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore that, we've had statements now in the last 5 days. Dmitry Polyansky, the former number 2 guy at the UN mission Russia's UN mission to the UN, and I know Dmitry. He was
a very good friend. He's a
when,
very
when,
good friend.
when I spoke to when I addressed the UN Security Council on the whole Nord Stream pipeline issue, he was in my point of contact at the embassy, and so bought me a coffee at the UN and steered me around, and we've been in touch ever since. So. And then Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, who I met first back in December of 2023 in Moscow. I was there with Pepe Escobar and Alistair Crook. Both men have made very strong statements in the last 5 days about the need, basically Russia's going to attack the European. If the Europeans continue to supply these missiles that are enabling attacks against Russia, Russia will retaliate. Now, for Dmitry to say that, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's the kind of thing that Dmitry's not sitting there just offering his opinion and saying, I've been thinking about this. I'm just going to speak off the cuff. Oh, no. When he said that, he's delivering a message that's got signed, sealed, and delivered by Vladimir Putin, as well as Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. And the fact that they are now they're delivering a coordinated message. The West better pay the hell attention, because I think the odds are within 3 months, there will be a Russian strike on the production facilities of drone factories in Europe that are involved with supplying drones to Ukraine.
You can probably confirm this or deny it, Larry, but I heard last night that the Duma actually voted and passed legislation allowing Putin to go to war with whomever he decided he needed to.
Yeah, I've heard the same. Yes.
Yeah. And of course, it's referring to NATO.
Yeah.
This leads us to many possible points of U.S. I guess we could say U.S. NATO chaos, but we could just really say U.S. imperial chaos at this point, with the U.S. Steering this ship, however, chaotically and haphazardly. But I don't know if you saw the reports, Larry, and Carl Works, you comment on this too, that Politico is reporting this despite the fact that the U.S. is very much still seemingly obsessed with trying to restart the war against Iran with the Israelis and Donald Trump, as Colonel Wilkerson, you said, he wants to and he doesn't want to. But it seems like they also want to overthrow the Cuban government in a potential military operation. This is according to Politico, that Trump and his advisor are frustrated that their pressure campaign, like trying to blockade them, cut off their fuel, economic sanctions, etc., didn't cause regime change, which is interesting since Cuba's only been going through this for forever. But this is the Politico report. Yes, Trump might really attack Cuba. That appeared in Politico. Larry, how does even such a thing occur? Because there are a group of Republicans, prominent, influential ones inside of Washington, inside of Congress, that are scared of what this might do to their political prospects in the midterm elections, despite many people who watch this program saying, politicians don't really care about their seats, et cetera, et cetera. People actually Congress people do. They like to hold on to those seats unless they have a revolving door opportunity, but they want to hold on to their seats if they want to win, if they want to run again. And there are a few that do not see a war on Cuba as yielding results that would do anything good for them. But what do you make of this report that we could be looking at a war on Cuba with an ongoing war against Iran?
Well, I want to introduce a concept that I'm sure Colonel Wilkerson's never heard of. It's called if you break it, you own it. And I'll let him talk at length about that. What Colin Powell tried to tell George W. Bush about the dangers of going into Iraq. Militarily, yes, we've got a superior military to that of Cuba. Okay, so we go in and remove the government. Then what? Then we own it, and then whatever government that is installed is now seen as a U.S. puppet. And there are enough Cubans in Cuba, and the terrain is sufficiently dense and robust enough that, Cuban guerrilla operations will then continue, and there'll be attacks upon the U.S. And so the U.S. is going to get itself into a miniature quagmire that it absolutely does not need. Instead of, again, let's start by, if you want to change the government in Cuba, lift the embargo. Let it actually allow economic activity to flow. And then what happens is the government no longer can blame failure in society on these external sanctions. They have to take responsibility themselves. But no, that's, the United States is, too stupid to do that. We've always made sure that we've kept an external enemy for Cuba to fight against. And so this is, I don't know what the plan is. Okay, yeah, we can maybe insert some special operations forces to take out an existing government. Then what? Who's going to, at that point, then we got to supply the water. We got to supply the electricity. We got to supply the food. While we're a little distracted in West Asia, it just is insanity.
Yeah, and I let me actually pull up this as a follow-up, because I think this is what the U.S. is going to look at if they go into Cuba, because I think it could be even worse than what you're saying, Larry, in the sense that, we could see maybe a second kind of Cuban revolution. In Israel is saying that in a restart of war against Iran, this is from Ynet, saying, 50-50 possibility of renewing the war. But an Israeli official told Ynet that Iranians are euphoric and view themselves as big winners. Trump is only threatening war and does not really want to become entangled in a renewed hostilities. The Iranians are not prepared to give Trump anything they want. Their agenda is to humiliate Trump and show they defeated the world's greatest power. I would say if you attack Cuba, you would have a lot of young people who are frustrated with sanctions, with the difficulty of economic development there, to dwindling, if not completely diminished prospects. You would have a lot of them wanting to fight against the U.S. invaders and those who are striking them, giving them a similar kind of fervor to defeat the empire, especially since it's 90 miles away and it's not like there isn't a history there. So, Colonel Wilkerson, how about your comments on this? There seems to be some parallels here. There could be euphoria all across the world going to Cuba from Iran, one after another, the U.S. putting itself in this position.
I think you have to look at this as an isolated case as well as you're indicating a connected case. And the isolated case is what's happening around Trump right now. And what I mean by that is the same thing happened around George W. Bush when people in the Republican Party mostly people out at AEI and other places like that discovered how inexperienced this president was, and discovered how much Cheney was filling in for that inexperience in certain areas, but it didn't encompass the entire national security portfolio. So in flowed everyone that, for example, having followed Cuba for some 35, 40 years, that I thought was anathema. Absolutely unbelievable jerks. Otto Reich, Roger Noriega, people like that. They just flowed into the administration and began trying to assume secondary and tertiary spots. Powell got rid of several of them. He couldn't get rid of Roger Noriega. He stayed there. But that's what's happening now. And with regard to Cuba, you see the piece that just came out. And pure propaganda, but enough truth in it to essentially get people's ire up, if you will, and get it up in the right places, like in Las Vegas, in New Jersey, in Florida, and so forth, where there's huge Cuban communities. And if you didn't see it, it's all about how the Cuban military is making all the money in Cuba. They're getting everything. And Raul Castro sits at the top of this. And the article actually included a network drawing with all the people, the Ramirez's, the Fernandez, and all the rest of the people that are making fortunes. No one in Cuba is making a fortune off of this circuit that's set up. So these people are now jumping into this vacuum that Trump has created. And he's created it with this patina at the top of the vacuum, and that says, I'm willing to go to war with anybody. Because, Danny, we're doing this with Greenland again. We're doing it with Cuba, as you pointed out. We're doing it with Iran in your face. We might be doing it again with Iraq if Israel keeps building bases out there with our help. It's all these people who are jumping on the bandwagon, and they want to get their pet peeve, and they're going to get it. They're going to go after it, and they're going to get it because this president does not know what he's doing. His Secretary of Defense does not know what he's doing. I'm convinced increasingly the chairman doesn't know what he's doing, and nobody in the government, Rubio, whomever, knows what they're doing. So all these villains are flowing into the cracks and crevices and going after their pet project. Cuba has been a pet project of certain Americans for a very long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Including, I mean, Rubio is one of them. So one of those cracks and crevices could literally be
right at Foggy Bottom.
Yeah.
I was laughing when he mentioned the name Otto Reich. So when I taught at American University back in 1981, we'd invite speakers to come in. You know, it was the Washington semester program. So I'd line up speakers for 3 days a week, and then the students would do internships in offices. And one of my speakers back then was Otto Reich. So it's just like, well, there was a blast from her past. And I'm talking 45 years ago now.
Yeah, you can't get rid of these people.
Yeah.
And Roger Noriega is his son. You know, if Roger and I used to talk, and I'd say, you talk just like Otto. Well, I am just like Otto.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we do have something that's developing, gentlemen, and I would like your opinion on it, and that is the trip that Vladimir Putin is currently undergoing and participating in to China. He has just arrived in China, and I'm curious, you know, I'll show you the reception. This is the video of how he was received, very similar to Trump in many ways, but he was picked up by Wang Yi, which is the foreign minister, and unlike in many places in the world, to be picked up by the foreign minister in China, like Wang Yi, is actually a higher honor than to be picked up by the vice president, which is what happened with Donald Trump. But very similar reception in many ways, but at the same time, lots on the table to discuss and lots on the table that's going to happen. So maybe Larry and then Colonel Wilkerson, what are your thoughts on the significance of this meeting, especially the timing? It's coming not days after Donald Trump returned from Beijing himself.
Well, just a week. You know, it was the last Friday that Trump came back. So less than a week. You know, the key item for the discussion is this new security architecture in the Persian Gulf, because I think the Russian intelligence, Chinese intelligence, they're carefully monitoring what the U.S. is going to do. So they'll have a good idea before the attacks are launched, when or if they're going to be launched. And that's why, again, I come back to a lot of this hinges upon Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar, those three right there can put a stop to this war if they refuse to continue cooperating with the United States, which will infuriate Trump. But it puts the United States in a position of what else is it going to do? I mean, I know not through any classified information, just through the serendipity of having a neighbor, friend of one of my neighbors up the street. He's a pilot, private pilot, but his son. I was talking to him the other day. I said, "Oh man," he says, "my son is coming home next week from the war in the Middle East." I said, "Well, where's he at?" He says, "Oh, he's stationed at Prince Saud Air Base." I said, "What does he do?" He says, "He flies KC-135s, but he's getting home next week because his wife is having a child via C-section, so they got him out of there." And while the son has been circumspect with what he's told his father, the essence of the message is, man, this place is dangerous and it is not hospitable. So if the Saudis basically start shutting down the U.S. air operations there, you're not going to have a continue. This war is going to be effectively forced into a diplomatic track. And that's what I anticipate that, Putin and Xi are going to be talking about in depth. I mean, economic cooperation, that's, there's no disagreement there. There's no anything to argue or discuss. Russia and China are full-fledged partners on that issue. Immigration, labor, again, that they've gotten to the place, I think, now that you don't have to get a visa to travel from China to Russia and vice versa. So, I think the focus is going to be on them coordinating a strategy to deal with the United States, because they recognize the United States is not under the control of stable leadership. It's just the opposite.
Yeah,
I'll say. Colonel Wilkerson, your thoughts?
I was just going to add that they just released this. In the name of God, the official X account of the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, PGSA, is now live. Follow us for real-time updates on the Hormuz Strait and on operations and the latest developments. They wouldn't have done that probably without coordinating with both China and Russia.
Yeah.
So they've got their deal going in the strait as if we weren't there.
Yeah. Both China and Russia have not incurred. There are many elements to that too. China and Russia have not incurred the significant negative impacts. Everyone has had to deal with the rising oil prices, but Russia has profited a lot from rising oil prices, and China has been able to stave off the worst effects of it. And
loves the fact that Taiwan is affected majorly,
and cannot do what China has done to stave it off. And to that point too, what Taiwan can do, because it's not an independent country, is work with Iran to ensure that its vessels get out of the Strait of Hormuz, which is exactly what's been going on. But Colonel Wilkerson, you'll actually really like this. I've actually been here, but one of the ways that China has been able to stave off the worst effects or the harshest effects of the ongoing Strait of Hormuz crisis is through its renewable energy sector. And here you have ABC News. It's so funny because I've actually been to this exact place in Gansu province, far west in China, talking about this renewable energy boom in China. And here's just, I'll play the video because I find it very interesting. It's very short.
China's been able to offset some of the energy shock from the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz being shut, in part because of its commitment, its shift to renewable energy in recent years. Like here in northwestern Gansu province, where this major solar thermal power plant rises out of the desert, you can see streams of light there beaming from these 12,000 mirrors, which move with the sun, redirects that sunlight onto that central tower there, heating molten salt to extreme temperatures. Now, they say in just 1 hour altogether, they're able to generate enough energy for a family's regular use in China for about 40 years. In fact, they say the tower generates enough energy by itself to power the equivalent of Aspen, Colorado for a year.
So that's the report there. I've actually been there. I didn't. It's a cloudy day here, so I didn't get that nice sunny. This is actually the Gobi Desert, so it's a very impressive feat. It's a massive solar farm.
If you've seen the
power, yeah.
If you've seen the ones that they're having a bit of a problem with in terms of the Tibetans, but nonetheless they're there and they're growing. The solar arrays they're building up in the incredibly clean atmosphere of Tibet, where you get about 4 to 5 times the power from these panels. And the panels are better panels than we have anyway. The Chinese make the best solar panels in the world. And the fact that you can get it at that altitude and they're building out more, they're going to, I think I read in National Geographic, with that alone, they're going to get the equivalent of the Yellow River Dam. So in terms of hydropower versus solar power, they are way ahead of everybody else in the world on renewable.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is the future, and this is kind of the future. I think Russia and China, Russia has a lot of oil, so it doesn't necessarily have to shift in this way, but we know that this cooperation between Russia and China is across the board, and they share a big border, actually. And actually across that border, China produces a lot of these things. They produce a lot of trains. They produce in the province that borders Russia, trains and transportation and all kinds of infrastructure like this that Russia definitely benefits from. So Larry, any comments that you have on this?
Well, it's just a reminder, Pepe, if you saw the documentary he made about his travel across the old new Silk Road, and that the remarkable technological advance of China. This goes back to looking at that meeting with Trump and Xi. Xi was very upfront about referring to the United States as a declining power, China as a rising power. And Trump, didn't get the message. He thought, oh yeah, he's talking about Biden. No, man, he's talking about you too. And the United States, I am fascinated by, I'm in touch with or listen to several people who are, quote, Chinese experts. And they're always talking about how much trouble China is in, how fragile China is, how oh my God, they're living on the edge of disaster. And all of this is just, a fraud. It's not real. And I'm thinking, guys, the Chinese have accomplished more technologically in the last 10 years than the United States has in the last 40 years. And do they have some population challenges? Yes. Do they have some problems with their real estate market? Yes. But China's not sitting on a debt to GDP ratio of 130 million to 1. No, their debt to GDP ratio is more like all of it combined is like 88. So they're not in the kind of extreme financial stress that we are, and yet the world continues to move in its direction. They're building more electrical vehicles that aren't dependent upon oil. They have diversified their industry. They're well advanced in the area of robotics and drones. Not us, and yet we persist with this delusion that somehow we're more advanced, more on top of it. We're the old cat's pajamas, and it's not the case anymore. And so, here was Xi basically acknowledging reality, and Trump failing to grasp it.
Yeah. I mean, China doesn't have, to your point, Larry. I mean, you mentioned earlier the 40 trillion U.S. government debt, many trillions too of corporate debt, and then we go down to the individual level, the credit card debt, auto loan debt, mortgage debt. I mean, it's astronomical. It's
Yeah.
also in the trillions on each level. All of those things are bubbles at that level, at the ground level here. But Colonel Wilkerson, no problem. The future is not Chinese. You know, according to Wall Street Journal, we have Apple, the NBA, and Cindy Sweeney. So we must be on the way up, actually. But your thoughts?
I think one of the things that both Wang Yi and Xi are concerned about, and I put this in the think tank, the Central Party School, as a major concern too, is that all of this is happening, and it's happening a lot faster than even the Chinese thought it was going to happen. And that at the end of the day, what the empire will do when it realizes that it is in this sad shape is try to stop it. And it'll try to stop it with nuclear weapons to level the playing field, if you will. I think that's a growing concern in both Moscow and Beijing. Other places too, but principally there, because they're the ones that have to enter the arms race that we are starting in order to keep up and spend all the resources that they could spend otherwise. China doesn't want to spend all these resources on nuclear weapons, but it's made the decision to do so. And what I don't know is whether or not their decision was to match the world or just to match us. I think it's probably just to match us, because if Russia and China stay as close as lips and teeth, as Mao said, then they don't need to match Russia and us combined. But still, we're talking about going back to something close to Cold War, 30,000 nuclear warheads levels. And maybe not quite that far, because these damn warheads today are much more powerful, much more accurate, and in most cases hooked up to much faster missiles than they were in the past. This is a very, very dangerous thing we're doing, and they know it, but they don't know how to stop it. And I would say on Xi Jinping and Wang Yi and Putin and others, Sergei Lavrov's major list is, what do we do about this? What do we do about this errant superpower declining and disappearing, and yet still extremely dangerous?
Well, this was a great show, gentlemen. Any final thoughts? Larry, I'll go to you before we close out.
On what the Emirates or what the Qataris or what the Saudis ask them to do. I mean, if the Saudis and the others had blocked their airspace, that would be a different story. If all these countries said no to the United States, and you're not going to be allowed to use our airspace or our land or our sea, that would be a different story altogether. You have to leave our countries, and we want to have peaceful relations with our neighbors. That would be a different scenario. But based on some requests, that's not going to change anything in any significant way. So just like if you recall, when they carried out the operation 2-3 weeks ago in the near the Strait of Hormuz, and then when it failed, they said the Pakistanis asked us to discontinue it because we were close to an agreement, or something like that. Obviously, it had nothing to do with Pakistan, and it wasn't due to a Pakistani request that they ended a major military operation that was supposed to open the Strait of Hormuz for ships that the Americans wanted to get through. That definitely wasn't the case. The operation failed. Now, in the case of these three countries, either they put a request to Trump, and he, because of that, he delays this, then that basically means that the calculations are still the same. In other words, what was supposed to happen, let's say today, will probably happen in 2-3 days from now. If it wasn't based on their calculations, and if it wasn't based on the requests of these three countries, like in the case of Pakistan, as I mentioned earlier, then again, it doesn't change the calculations. So based on what we see in the region, on the movements of troops and equipment in the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Jordan, and in the Israeli regime. Based on that, on all of these, the Iranians believe that the chances for war are very high. The chances for a major assault against Iran are very high. And the last 2-3 days, they've been on full alert for quite a while, for 2-3 weeks. The last couple of days, more so than before, because they're constantly monitoring the movements. So nothing really has changed. So if we believe that Trump will actually wait a couple of days, he says 2 or 3 days. And if we believe that he's honest, that he won't carry out some sudden attack today, which I don't think anyone in Iran would say that that's impossible, or that's that they're not going to prepare themselves for such a scenario, then it's just we'll have to wait. We shouldn't even wait 3 days. We'll say, let's put it 2 days. 2 days after last night. After that, you can be pretty sure, based on what we're seeing now, that an assault will take place. Does that mean it will necessarily happen? No. But the assessment now, from my understanding, is that an assault on Iran and the Iranian people is high. The chances for an assault are high.
New York Times reported that Iran has extensively reorganized and prepared for a new war, ready to fire hundreds of missiles and drones a day. And this assessment is on the part of New York Times. We know about them, but on the part of Iranians, how do they see the conflict? If the war happens, it's going to be from the air, the same sort of strategy they had with the first and the second round of war?
Again, it depends. The Americans have capabilities in the region that they did not have before for ground operations, meaning that they could attack islands, or they can attack the mainland, and they can also carry out another operation like the one near Isfahan, which failed, because that wasn't about saving pilots or anything like that. That was an operation to extract Iran's uranium. So the Americans have capabilities in the region that they didn't have before, so they can carry out a ground assault. Also, they've been funding terrorists inside Iran, the remnants of those who carried out the military assaults on January the 8th and 9th. The ones where the Americans keep saying 40 million people or 40,000 people were killed or whatever. Those terrorists, the remnants, and they are being prepared. But also on the border with Pakistan, ISIS, and the Takfiri, Al-Qaeda, the Wahhabi, Salafi Takfiris that are funded by Western intelligence agencies and the Israeli regime, they are being prepared. And in Iraqi Kurdistan, they're also being prepared. Some say roughly 5,000 people. These terrorists are being prepared. So there are multiple scenarios. So these are the capabilities that the Iranian side is preparing itself for, and they could be a part of this broader operation. But what is also the case is that the United States has certain difficulties now that it didn't have before. One, as we've discussed before on your show, is the weather. It is becoming very hot in the Arabian Peninsula. And if there is an assault, then Iran's critical infrastructure is targeted, which is quite possible. Then when Iran retaliates, that could end those regimes. So, for example, if Iran strikes the Emirati critical infrastructure, its electricity, its water, then everyone in the Emirates will have to leave. They'll have to go to Oman. They'll have to go. The country will collapse. So, and the same is true with the other 5. So everyone will immediately have to. There's tiny countries, except for Saudi Arabia, but they'd all have to leave, and that would really be the end of these regimes. And so, and I think that would basically mean that a global economic depression, far worse than 1929, the 1930s, is inevitable. The second point, the second disadvantage that the Americans have, so the advantages were that they brought in ground troops, they brought in capabilities, and they've been funding their terrorists, and as I explained. But another disadvantage is that they don't have the sort of ammunition that they had the last time around. As you know, and as you've said before, and as your other guests have pointed out, U.S. ammunition is very low in with regards to key tools that they, or key types of ammunition that they would like to use. So a 39-day assault on the Iranian people would be impossible to carry out with this amount of ammunition. Some are critically low, some are low, but 39 days is not possible. But the Iranians do have that ability. So, and this is what the Americans should be worried about. The Iranians are not going to necessarily stop the war when they feel that they can no longer continue. The Iranians are going to stop the war whenever they feel that the other side has been adequately punished. So Iran's missile and drone capabilities and other capabilities are much greater than the capabilities of the Americans, because Iran has been producing these weapons for decades. And the Iranian military industry is different from the United States, where they're just making money, where the companies, they take billions and they produce nothing, or they produce very expensive equipment with very little ammunition. The Iranians, when they build missiles, they build them, one after another. So they have, in all these underground cities, they're full of missiles. And many of the underground cities have not been used yet. So Iran has no shortage of firepower. And as I just explained earlier in a couple of previous shows you've invited me, the Iranians at the beginning of the war, they were using a lot of their older drones and older missiles. But what they're producing now, they're newer drones and newer missiles. Remember, a number of things have happened since, and the New York Times article should remind us of what happened after the 12-day war. After the 12-day war, Iran redesigned everything. So a lot of its buildings were emptied. A lot of its high-tech equipment were removed from the places that they used to be, in order to preserve them in case of attack. So, and a lot of Iranian facilities were taken underground. So a lot of expensive Iranian equipment are hidden here and there in places where they can't be bombed. And a lot of them that are necessary for war, they're in factories underground to produce goods. So the Iranians can easily outlast the Americans. So there's no logic in this, as we were discussing before the show. U.S. policy towards Iran is not logical. The siege, yes, it's going to hurt Iranians. It hurts Iranians as we speak. But the Iranians will outlast the Americans. And the global economy is going to go down. Militarily, yes, the United States and the Israeli regime, when they strike the Iranian people with the help of our neighbors, they hurt us. But we will still outlast them. So, but still, the belief is that the United States is not taking a rational approach, and just as they haven't so far, we're approaching 3 months now, and if the 39 days of war was a success, then why did Trump begin with unconditional surrender, and then ultimately by day 39 accept the Iranian 10-point plan as the framework for negotiations? If the siege was working well, then why did they try to open the Strait of Hormuz with an operation 2-3 weeks ago? If the siege is still going well, then why is Trump planning for another assault on Iran? Again, the assault is not based on my understanding and based on the assessment of people who I consider to be reasonable and rational and who I learn from, both your guests and other friends. Based on my understanding, this is going to be an utter failure for the United States. But the difference is that now the global economy is in a very precarious situation and much more vulnerable than before. And a continuation of the current policy by Trump, I think, will destroy him, his presidency, his party, and U.S. hegemony.
Is there any way for Saudi Arabia and Qatar to stay out of the war if the war starts again?
Well, if they stay out of the war, that would mean that the Americans would not be able to use their airspace, their territory, their nothing. They'll have to leave. There'll have to be no troops on their territory. That's not what we see at the moment. So there's an enormous American presence. Some assets of the United States have been taken further away for protection, but they have lots of assets in the region. But yes, if these 5 countries were to tell the Americans that you cannot wage war against Iran using our territory, using our capabilities, then war would not be possible, because logistically speaking, it would be very difficult for the Americans to carry out even limited strikes. So yes, it would make a big difference, but I don't think that that's happening. My understanding, and I may be wrong, but my understanding is not that the Saudis have, or the Emiratis, or the Qataris have said, you cannot use our territory. They pressed Trump to delay it, to see if a solution can be found. That's not a very big deal. That's not going to change the situation. It makes it a bit more difficult for the United States, true, because we're 3 more days of shortages across the world, 3 more days closer towards the hot weather, 3 more days of U.S. soldiers in very uncomfortable situation, 3 more days of extra expenses for the U.S. military. And some believe that the U.S. military has spent well over, some calculations here that are being made in Iran are that the United States has spent well over $200 billion, not 25 billion or not 50. Just today, actually, someone was showing me a calculation on, and this has nothing to do with the price of oil and all that, but based on their own calculations, that the price of this war is much higher. But in any case, each day makes it more difficult, but it's not going to be a big difference. It's something that Trump can do. He can say, look, I'm taking this extra step for the sake of peace. And then later on, he can, carry out his assault. So the calculations in Tehran have not changed.
We know that Donald Trump, the reason that he's talking about the war, they want to force Iran into a new position or accept the terms of Washington. And how is that possible with the mindset you see in Tehran? We know what's going on. Many people don't know what's going on in Iran. They want to know what is the position of the government if the escalation happens, if the new attacks happening, not on the part of the United States, but Israelis all together coming back to the war. Is that going to change or force Iran into a new position?
No. And even if the Americans succeed in murdering senior Iranian leaders again, which of course, and just talking about this is strange. The fact that this has become the new norm, where the Zionist regime and the Trump regime, they can just murder people, they can invade, they can threaten to take over Cuba, they can take Venezuela hostage. It's just amazing how they've where they've taken the world in just a year and a half. I mean, the United States has always been very sinister, the regime, but we now live in a completely lawless world. But even if the United States succeeded, and the Zionist regime succeeded in, let's say, taking out or murdering our leaders, a series of leaders are martyred again, it's not going to change anything. the next, let's say, layers of leaders are going to be the same. They just don't comprehend Iran. And right now, during these 3 months, new leaders have come. They are now acquainted. Now they have their own deputies. Their deputies are like-minded people. So what? So are they going to kill another? Nothing is going to happen. All they're going to do is dig themselves deeper into into this hole that they've already made for themselves. Nothing is going to change in Iran. In fact, all that they've done during this period is show how credible the Iranian leaders are. Because during this war, Nima, no one resigned. No one left his or her position. Everyone, whether the military or civilian, they stood their ground. No one went with their families and hid somewhere in like the north of Iran in the forest, in some villa and so on. Everyone was at work. Everyone, and those who were martyred were immediately replaced. The next person in line took charge, and then their deputies moved up. And so for decades, the Americans have been trying, through their Persian media, have been trying to convince Iranians that the state, the so-called regime, they're separate from the people. But disproportionately, we've seen commanders and people of influence being martyred and then immediately being replaced by others who then were martyred too. And then so people are seeing that these people are paying a heavy price, yet they remain steadfast. What the Americans have unwittingly done in the Israeli regime is that they've strengthened the credibility, the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic in the eyes of its people and across the world. Because people are outside of Iran are looking and thinking, what is this country? Who are these people that they're able to stand up against the superpower in this way and give these martyrs, yet still remain steadfast? So, obviously it causes damage to society when elites are murdered, when scientists are murdered, when commanders or military commanders are martyred. But at the same time, it has created a certain bond within Iranian society that will make it much stronger in the months and years ahead. Does that mean that the Americans will not be able to, carry out terror attacks in Iran? Of course they will. Does that mean that we, in the coming weeks or months, they may not be able to carry out riots here or there? Of course they'll try, and they will do that, as they've done in the past. And every time there's some riot somewhere because of some shortage that they've instigated, or terror attacks, or they'll say that the regime is about to fall. These are it's finally collapsing. But it won't. It's the opposite has in fact happened. Iran is much stronger today, and it will persevere during this period of crisis, come what may. So, in my opinion, all their calculations were wrong. As I was saying to you before the show, everything that the Americans have done, it has damaged the United States and the Israeli regime. And the Israeli regime has sacrificed the United States for its own selfish interests. But the Israeli regime is working against its own interests. So some of the things that they do may be logical, but when you put them all together, this entire policy has been illogical. It may be logical, for example, to take out a commander, but the way in which all of this has been put together, it has only enhanced the strength of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It has made the armed forces more credible. It has made those who lead the country more credible in the eyes of the people. And so if they continue with this, all they do is they further these bonds. But they will continue to miscalculate. So particular action may sound logical at one level, but when you look at the bigger picture, everything they've done has only served to empower Iran, the Islamic Republic, the axis of resistance, and it has made people across the world, let alone many young people in Iran who had no interest in any of this before, and students of mine who are completely indifferent to everything political. They've changed. So everything that the United States is doing, and the reason why this is not to the benefit of the Israeli regime either is because Iran's influence is growing, and then Israeli all those regimes that are allied to the Israeli regime, they're being undermined as a result of Gaza, as a result of these wars. So, if they think that the status quo in the Arabian Peninsula is going to remain the same, perhaps, but that's not predetermined. So I think that this is based on the selfishness of Netanyahu for his own selfish gains. And what I was saying the other time that I was on your show turned out to be correct. I said that Netanyahu, he revealed his trip to the Emirates for his own selfish gains. Now we're hearing that the opposition leader was supposed to go. Whether that's correct or not, I'm not saying it's correct. But it's not as if Netanyahu is working for the Israeli regime. It's not as if these people are working for the interests of the Zionist project. He's working for himself, and I think that all these policies during the last 2.5 years in Gaza and Lebanon and elsewhere, even in Syria, what they did in Syria, I said this after Syria fell, what they did in Syria was they exposed in the long run, for those who are fair-minded and those who are really seeking truth, they've exposed that Iran and Hezbollah and the resistance were right all along about the nature of the so-called Syrian revolution. So I don't think that anything that Netanyahu has done in the past 2.5 years has been to the benefit of the Israeli regime in the broader sense. And I think all of this is horrible for the United States. And Iran has the upper hand. And we'll have to wait and see what the next round of war brings to the world.
There's some rumors about the new proposal, Iranian proposal, 14-point plan. It was updated. It seems that in the latest version, some reports saying that Iran has mentioned finally the Iranian nuclear program, but it said that they're not pursuing nuclear bombs. That was mentioned in the new proposal. The other one says that Iran has agreed to send enriched uranium to Russia instead. What is that? Is that all about rumors and some sort of allegations with no basis, or we have something about that being discussed in Iran?
Yeah, this is all speculation. The Iranian position has not evolved. There may be changes in text, tactical changes, or changing of wording, or prioritizing some things over another. But nothing has changed in the Iranian position. That and why should it? Are the Iranians demanding the territory of neighboring countries? Are the Iranians demanding the United States give up its nuclear weapons? Iran is not demanding anything unreasonable. Iran is demanding reparations for all the kids that the Americans have murdered, that the Israelis have murdered, all the civilians that they've murdered, all the civilian infrastructure that they've murdered, that they've destroyed. What is strange about that? It's a war of aggression. It's an illegal war of aggression. The Strait of Hormuz, these are not international waters. It's a tiny waterway that belongs to Iran and Oman. And Iran is saying from now on, it's not going to be like before. You brought this upon yourselves. The Americans, Netanyahu, and Trump brought this upon the United States and the Israeli regime. Does Iran want the Strait of Hormuz closed? No, it's not Iran that's closed the Strait of Hormuz, it's the Americans. It's the United States on behalf of the Israeli regime that has done this. Iran wants the Strait open. We had a ceasefire agreement. And in that ceasefire agreement, we were supposed to have a ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza and across the board. And then we were supposed to allow the ships that were linked to those countries that helped the United States in the war to use the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, ships are passing.
There's a huge business out there, bigger than the NFL when it comes to revenue, called data brokers. What data brokers do is they collect your information, anything they can publicly find out about you, and they compile it all together and they sell it to anyone who is willing to buy it. That can be advertisers, marketing companies, insurance companies, which is where all the telemarketer phone calls come from. It's where all your spam emails come from, and it's the reason for all that junk mail in your mailbox. Now, to combat that, Aura searches all the data broker sites to find the ones that are selling your information, and they submit the opt-out request that requires those sites to take your information down and stop selling it. Then they continue to monitor those sites, and anytime your information pops back up, they submit another request, get it taken back down. If you want to see a huge reduction in telemarketer calls, spam emails, and junk mail in your mailbox, sign up with Aura, give them a few weeks to get the process going, get your information removed from those sites, and you'll see it drop dramatically.
It seems that we've lost Professor Marandi. Let me just check out. Yeah. You're back. You're back.
So, am I back? Okay, sorry. The Iranians do not want the Strait of Hormuz closed, but the Iranians, ships, Russian ships, Chinese ships, Iraqi ships, ships from Oman, Iran, others go through, Indian and Pakistani ships, but the limitations are for those regimes that have been at war with Iran. And in the ceasefire agreement, Iran was going to allow many of those ships to go through. But the Americans and Netanyahu and Trump violated the ceasefire. He imposed a siege on Iran on the Strait of Hormuz, and Netanyahu continued with the slaughter in Lebanon. So they violated the ceasefire agreement that Trump agreed to. It wasn't Iran. So Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz is nothing extraordinary. Iran doesn't want U.S. forces to be able to rebuild bases in the Persian Gulf for obvious reasons. They've killed so many kids. So nothing in the 10-point Iranian plan is extraordinary. It's all normal. But for the empire, for any country to say we want our rights as a sovereign country, that's abnormal. For the empire, for Iran to say you have to respect our sovereignty, they say no, we're not going to respect your sovereignty. We have rights as a country to have a peaceful nuclear program. They say, no, you don't have any rights. You must give assurances that you'll never attack us again. No, we won't give you such assurances. That's the mentality of the empire, and that's why we're not seeing any real progress.
There were disagreements between Saudi Arabia and UAE. That's why we had UAE criticizing Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But when it comes to that concept of non-aggression pact, is that gonna? How do you see the role of Pakistan in that? Pakistan has some sort of military agreement with Saudi Arabia. Is that of concern for Iran, or is that something that Iran knows about each and every aspects of that cooperation with Saudi Arabia? Because we know how close the government in Pakistan is to Iranians. I think it's obvious right now the cooperation between the two governments. How do they see the situation with Saudi Arabia, and how can they facilitate to help the situation with this new pact? As we're talking, Saudi Arabia is talking about it together with Qatar, and they need it because of this Strait of Hormuz as time goes by.
No, it's not going to make any difference to Iran. Iran's relationship with Pakistan is very good. The Pakistani population is with Iran. The polls show that in Pakistan, Iran's popularity is through the roof. And that's during the time when Iran was bombing U.S. targets and targets affiliated to the United States or to the subordinates of the United States across the Persian Gulf region. People know what's going on. And Iran did not start the war. Iran did not initiate any escalation. As we speak, Iran right now can carry out assaults, major assaults, but it doesn't do so because it doesn't want to initiate war. That's not in it for Iran. It's an immoral position. Contrary to in the West, Iran has moral values. That's why Iran is opposed to the genocide in Gaza. That's why it's opposed to the Holocaust, the ongoing Holocaust. And that's why the West supports the ongoing Holocaust, because they don't have moral values. The Western leads the regimes. And the Iranians do have moral values. So Iran is not going to initiate any war against any of its neighbors. But if the United States attacks Iran, those countries that host U.S. bases, those countries that facilitate U.S. strikes, they are part of that war, just like during the 39 days. There's no escape. And there's nothing, the Americans couldn't defeat Iran. No one else can defeat Iran.
General Keith Kellogg said that this only solution for the United States is to occupy the Hark Island, and the islands close to the Hark Island. And
Hercules delivers professional performance and durability at prices that pull their weight. New tools, innovative technology, and a hassle-free warranty to back it up. Hercules, only at Harbor Freight.
Sales calls, scammers. Arm yourself and avoid unwanted calls. BIN Verify's reverse phone search is a powerful tool that can help you discover more.
what is the capabilities of Iran with the Hark Island and the air defense system? We've learned that Iran has improved its air defense system, but do they have air defense system on these islands and the territory close to this island?
Nima, the Iranians want the United States to take some of these territories. They want them to come in. That's where the war starts. They're not going to keep them out. They want their forces to come on Iranian territory. And then those capabilities that Iran has hidden for decades and has been preparing for decades against the Americans, they'll begin using them. They'll begin striking the American troops. They'll begin to hammer them, counter strikes, whether it's on islands or whether it's on the mainland. They'll make them miserable. Ultimately, the Americans are going to have to leave. We discussed this at the very beginning of the war, almost at the beginning. I don't know when was our first conversation after the war began. I said that the Americans want this to be a short war, and the Iranians want this to be a long war. Remember, during the 39 days of fighting initially, the Americans, they said unconditional surrender. They thought it'd be over in a couple of days. Many of Iran's friends thought it would be over in a few days. The Iranians were planning this for decades. The Iranians were planning for a long war. So after a few days, when the Americans saw things were going downhill, they kept sending messages. The Iranians ignored them until Trump accepted the Iranian 10-point plan, which was a humiliation for him. And people attacked him, and then ultimately his folks went and said, no, we threw it in the bin. But he accepted it. He tweeted it. So then came the ceasefire. The longer it lasts, Trump is bringing down the global economy. Time is not on his side. So if they carry out an assault, let them take the island. Like, what difference does it make to us? There'll probably be some defenses. Then they'll allow them to take territory over wherever. I don't know the military plans, but the plan is to fight them on the ground, not to prevent them from getting there. The Americans can bomb a few places, take territory, but then they have to keep that territory. In the counterattacks that can last weeks and months, then the Americans will have to stay. Because if they leave, they're humiliated. So they have to stay, so the Iranians can keep hitting them and hitting them and hitting them and hitting them. So, I mean, these generals or former generals of the United States, they are fools. But these are political appointees, as you know. To become a general in the United States, you have to become you have to be obedient to the military-industrial complex. Why? Because after they retire, they want to get on the board of all, these different companies and make their millions. They've lived in a general with their entourage and so on, and then when they retire, they have nothing. So they want to be a part of something big so that they can keep that lifestyle. They're not like Iranian generals. Iranian generals, they're like us. They're on the front line. It's a different world. It's a different mentality. They're the first to put their lives on the line. So, it's a completely different world. So he can talk this way. Yeah, fine. That's exactly what the Iranians want. Not that the Iranians want war. No one should be mistaken. Because many people think, in the West, they say the Shia Muslims have what they call it? Something like martyrdom complex or something silly like that. No. They're prepared for martyrdom. But why? Because for the right cause, if you sacrifice your life, you're a martyr. And what is the right cause? It is supporting the children of Gaza. What is the right cause? Supporting the people of Cuba. What is the right cause? Opposing racism in Southern Africa. That's the causes that that's why they hate Iran. So if it's a cause to defend the country against an aggressor that supports ethno-supremacism and racism and ethnic cleansing and the extermination of children in Lebanon and Gaza, then, it's the right cause. So the Iranians want to make this a long war to punish the aggressor and to make sure that it never happens again. Iran wants to make sure when this war is over, the United States government never, ever thinks about attacking our country again. So we want this war to be longer in Iran so that in future we don't have to fight another war. And these people are prepared to give their lives, to make sacrifices, because this is the right cause, to end aggression and to support these people. Again, it goes beyond their comprehension, because in their narrative, I said before, and I've said this on many shows, I've been promoting Flint and Hillary Leverett's book, Going to Tehran. If people read that book or read Alistair Crook's book, Resistance, even though it's a somewhat old book and things have changed, I think they get a better understanding of this movement, of the resistance, of the axis of resistance, and what this all means. Instead of believing the silly narratives of the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Guardian or the Times or France 24, they should just ignore those. And if they read these, and if they read other material, there's another good book by Peter Oborn on the nuclear program. I forgot the name, but in any case, if people read, they'd see that actually the Iranians are very, very logical, very, very reasonable, and that ideologically speaking, they're very, it's all coherent, it all makes sense. But they've been taught for all these decades to see Iran as irrational, crazy, dangerous. And of course, who's been promoting this? The Epstein class, and their proxies in the region, the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris and their NATO allies and all that. But people are seeing through that. So in any case, the Iranians want the Americans to take islands. They want the Americans to take territory on the mainland. That's what they want. They want them to carry out these operations so that they can give them the real punishment, because that will be much more painful for them ultimately than Iran's missiles and drones.
Yeah, what would be your response to those people who are arguing the Iran proposal is too much for Donald Trump to agree on? And because part of what Iran is asking for in terms of the regime of sanctions, tremendous sanctions for such a long time on Iran, is not in the hand of the Trump administration alone. They have to cooperate with the Congress, with all parts of the, all components of the power in the United States. put an end to those, to the sanctions and all of that. What is your response to that if Donald Trump himself and his administration would not be able to provide that or to do that for Iran for the negotiations?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it just shows that Iran doesn't need the United States.
Get ready for summer with exciting styles and savings during the Living Spaces Memorial Day event. Upgrade your
The United States, if they don't want a peace agreement with Iran and they say they can't do it, then we move on. We're not going anywhere. Let them fight the war. We're prepared. They want to attack tonight? We're prepared. They want to attack tomorrow night? We're prepared. We're not afraid. Our cause is just. Where no one took a stand, Iran took a stand for Palestine, for Gaza. Our cause is just. We're protecting our sovereignty. We never initiated a war. This is the second war that the United States has launched against us in less than a year. If they can't deliver, then why should that's not our problem. They want us to give up our sovereignty and say we won't have a peaceful nuclear program because they say so, and then we can't demand that these unjust sanctions against ordinary Iranians be removed because they don't have the political capital to do it. That's not our problem. That's their problem. Again, Iran is not an ordinary country. And the United States has to come to terms with that. It can't come to terms with it. And that logic that you use indicates that we're not going to appease Trump. If there's going to be peace, then there has to be peace. That means all of our assets have to be released. That means the sanctions that target women and children, and that's what they do. Obama, Biden, Trump, Bush, all of them targeted ordinary Iranians. It's been normalized in the West because for them, human life doesn't matter. You see all these Western journalists in Beirut. As we speak, the Israelis target medics in Lebanon. They find them, they hunt them down to kill them. You would think that this would be like the #1 news story in the world. You don't even hear about it. Why? Because it's normal for them. Genocide, slaughter, death, sanctions, strangling Cuba, strangling Cuban children, preventing them from having a normal life. It's all normal. We're not going to accept that. And so if they can't deliver, then we won't have a peace agreement.
Yeah. You mentioned the situation in Lebanon. We know that Israel is attacking Lebanon and various parts. Today, we've learned from Smotrich. He's talking about if the government in Lebanon doesn't disarm Hezbollah, they're going to capture all the southern part of Lebanon. And I don't know how militarily Israel can do that, but at least they're talking about it and nobody's objecting. I'm talking about the government in Lebanon.
Well, the government in Lebanon is not a government. It's a puppet regime of the United States. But I have no doubt that there will be under no circumstances will we have a ceasefire agreement. Forget the peace agreement. Will we have a ceasefire agreement without Lebanon included? We are already seeing that. So if the lifting the siege on Iranian ports comes along with ending the war in Lebanon and the slaughter in Gaza, it comes with that, and it will not be separated. Second, every single building in Lebanon will be rebuilt. And those who assisted the enemy will pay. We'll see. Every single building will be built. So Israel will be expelled from Lebanon. And all those towns and villages that were flattened, they're going to be built better than before. And then the Israeli regime will have to wonder what this was all about. All this slaughter, the only thing that will remain for them is that the world despises them, and they're going to have increasing internal problems because of their failure. But Iran, under no circumstances, will separate these files from one another. It's not happening.
Do you expect Yemen helping Iran if the war starts again, or Iran doesn't need this time around Yemen to be involved because they can handle it, without.
My understanding is this time things are going to be very different. And Yemen is very prepared. The resistance in Iraq is going to be very different. This will be the decisive war. So the Americans will probably do everything it can, and the resistance will show them what they can do.
When emergencies happen, you want elite care. We care because you care.
What do we know, Professor Marandi, about those internet cables that pass through the Strait of Hormuz? Because there's some sort of reports that Iran is going to consider some sort of mechanism for those cables. But is that the case? Is there any sort of discussions in Iran?
Yes, there are these discussions, and everything is possible. Look, Nima, when they murder leaders and they slaughter kids and they bomb hospitals and they target medics and they bomb universities, they cannot complain about law and international law anymore. That's finished. So Iran will do what it deems to be in its interests, in the interest of the resistance, in the interest of the Palestinians and the Lebanese and Iran's allies and the Iranian people. So when they tear down international law, when they rip it up, they should have been thinking about it back then. So Iran will do whatever it deems necessary, whether it's with regards to internet cables, whether it's regards to ships, whether it's up. The Americans, the Europeans, they cannot. The problem that they have in the West, these Western elites, is that they want international law for themselves, but not for us. I remember speaking to this BBC journalist. She was really during the war, and when the Iranians first announced that they're going to control the Strait of Hormuz, she said, "This is against international law." And I said, you do know that war is being waged against Iran as we speak. First of all, it's not against international law. But what is international law exactly? You just murdered our leader. You just murdered all these kids. Your alliance. So she was really angry about, insisting that, why is Iran doing this? This is wrong. What? It's okay for you to kidnap presidents. It's okay for you to bomb fishermen or boats and kill hundreds of people in the Caribbean. It's okay for you to strangle 10 million people in Cuba. It's okay for you to destroy Syria with ISIS and Al Qaeda and the monstrous Caesar sanctions. It's okay for you to destroy Libya, and the list goes on. It's a never-ending list. Look at Afghanistan. After all the decades of dirty war there and occupation, it's a country, a broken country. The Americans, they were there for 20 years. What? They didn't do anything for the country. All they did was basically increase the production of drugs 20, 30-fold. And of course, the Emirates was the means through which the drug money went back and forth. But in any case, yes, those cables, like everything else, if necessary, the Iranians will deal with them in whatever way they think is necessary in order to bring an end to aggression.
Yeah. Before wrapping up, what has happened to those oil facilities that were supposed to explode by the blockade of the United States?
I'm at nights I try to, go to the rooftop and listen to see if maybe I can hear the explosions. Nima, our oil and gas industry has been under sanctions for decades. Sometimes we wouldn't be able to export, sometimes we would. Sometimes we'd have limited exports. Sometimes we'd have large amounts of. We know how to deal. We're sophisticated people. We're an educated people. You've been educated in Iran. You're a professor now in Brazil. You know what I'm speaking about. Iran is a highly educated society. We know how to make missiles. We know how to make drones. We know how to make military capabilities to defeat U.S. ground forces. And we know how to take oil out of the ground, and we know how to keep it in the ground. So I don't think the Americans should be too worried about our oil and gas assets, but they should be worried about the oil and gas assets of theirs on the other side of the Persian Gulf, because those countries do not have such an experience, and they're much more vulnerable. We don't want them to be damaged or destroyed, but if the Americans take the wrong actions, then retaliation will be inevitable.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
What the fun? Funny.
Are ongoing because Iran is in a position of exchanging proposals with the US. It's not just because you have reports that leaders in the Persian Gulf are desperately begging Trump not to restart the war. No, it's also because of the US and its abilities to continue to carry out this war and to weather the storm when Iran retaliates. So what does all of this mean for the current state of the conflict? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that right on schedule, President Trump has been all over the place. He claims that he called off a planned U.S. military attack on Iran hours before it was set to happen on Tuesday. He said he did so because the U.S. and Iran have been exchanging proposals and negotiations are technically ongoing, but also because the leaders of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE begged him not to restart the war. Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that several anonymous Gulf officials say they were unaware of any imminent U.S. attack plan. And you also have the New York Times reporting that the Pentagon is becoming increasingly concerned about Iran's effectiveness at tracking U.S. air operations and improving its air defenses. So how do you view this current state of the war? Are we out of the woods in terms of a possible U.S. attack, or is this just kind of par for the course given the fact that Trump has attacked twice during negotiations just in the last year?
Well, there is, of course, a very simple answer why all of this is happening. What is today, Rachel?
It is Tuesday.
Taco Tuesday, right? They're serving tacos in Washington. Trump always chickens out. Well, I mean, he doesn't always chicken out. He has surprise attacked Iran twice under the guise, well, him and Israel have twice attacked Iran under the guise of negotiations. So, of course, the Iranians can't trust his orange rear end any further than they can throw it. But this isn't a surprise. It's this weird situation where it would not be a surprise if he attacked Iran tomorrow. And it is not a surprise that he keeps putting off attacking Iran. And the reason for that is that he has himself in what chess terms is called a Zugzwang, meaning that anything he does, he has no good options, none. And anything he does will only make his situation worse. So he's left spinning, flailing around, turning left, turning right, and not finding any way out of this situation. He can't take the L, spin it as a victory, and walk away because the Hormuz Strait would remain under Iranian control. And even Trump can't spin that into a victory, right? It's just impossible. Besides which, he has none of the nuclear dust, which he has alternately made such a big deal out of. You know, he's talking enriched uranium. That's the way he refers to it. You know, he says that's the most important thing. In another interview, he's also admitted that is there's really nothing to it. It's all PR. There's really no danger whatsoever. So, I mean, as always with Trump, you are free to your own subjective interpretation of what, if anything, he says is true, or when he's being true, and when he flips, 180 degrees, and or is that true? You know, that is. I happen to think that he's one of those people who actually is capable of being sincere in one position one moment and being completely sincere in the exact opposite position in another moment, because he has no firm, real knowledge or beliefs about anything. He reacts everything. You know, some animals react completely on instinct. Well, he reacts completely on spin. That's the way he deals with everything. And I believe that when he says something in that moment, he actually believes it. Whether it has any relation to reality or not is another situation. But he can't take the L and walk away. And he can't agree to any of Iran's demands. War reparations, politically impossible in the U.S. Removing sanctions on Iran needs congressional approval, completely politically impossible in the U.S. Returning Iran's frozen funds after he has repeatedly attacked Joe Biden for doing exactly the same thing continuously. That would be very politically difficult for him. That they can't be seen as evacuating and leaving all the bases in the Middle East, even if some of them they never actually attempt to reopen because they're too vulnerable to the Iranians. They can't actually admit that that's the reason. And they can't accept Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, right? I mean, so we're at a complete impasse still. Neither side has been beaten completely into submission yet, but that's so you can't accept the conditions, and the status quo is unsustainable. We're in this geoeconomic game of chicken. All right, with Iranians' selective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S.'s attempted blockade of Iranian ports from way out in the Gulf of Oman or out in the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Malacca. I don't even know where they're attempting to enforce this, but far more ships get through than they're able to intercept or even turn around with a stiff word or whatever it is that they're doing. They only have 16 ships out there, and a couple of them are carriers, and some of them have to have constant destroyer escort as air cover. So I mean, they only actually have a handful of ships that are capable of intercepting tankers and cargo ships. And what are they going to do? Spread them all out across the Indian Ocean, hunting them down, and then have nothing left off the coast of Iran? It was always a completely unworkable and ridiculous idea. It was always more, as so much with Trump, more about narrative and about PR than about any type of military reality. So the global economy is getting closer and closer to precipice level, not just with oil, but LNG and aluminum and helium and fertilizer and everything else under the sun, sulfuric acid, that are all byproducts of the oil and gas production process that come out of the Strait of Hormuz, shortages of all of these things. And supposedly Europe, within the next 2 or 3 weeks, if this strait doesn't open, they're going to hit that cliff edge, and they're going to go into a complete crisis, energy crisis in Europe, in a way that really only parts of Asia have been affected so far. So they're up against the clock. Trump may say that it's Iran that's up against the clock, but it's actually the U.S. And U.S. intelligence admitted to us last week, in a very interesting, that it was linked to the New York Times and the other Western media, that U.S. intelligence believes that, and obviously so for all those of us in the alt media, that Iran can easily outlast Trump's blockade, right? So that's their own assessment. But, Trump world, he doesn't necessarily listen to any intelligence he doesn't get from Fox News, if that's not an oxymoron in its entirety. So what does he have left? Drop some more bombs. Well, they didn't do anything back in 2025. They didn't achieve the results they wanted, and they didn't during 2 months. But there'll be people whispering in his ear, you just need to drop more bombs. You need to drop bigger bombs, smarter bombs, right? And that'll make all the difference. Or, bombs and blockade. I mean, you'll always have neocons that if you just drop some more bombs in the right way, that will make all the difference in the world. And they'll either completely collapse, or they'll throw themselves at Trump's feet and give him whatever he wants, or decapitation strikes will take out the worst Iranian leaders, and the 3rd or 4th generation of them during this conflict, they'll be willing to surrender. That's the type of arguments that are made, the type of
There's this guy, Al Pine, and he loves nature. And he finds the water that comes right from the natural alpine
spinning that they do inside their little circle. And it's the U.S. They drop bombs. That's what they do. They have a hammer, right? It's an aging hammer. It's seen better days. It was bought by your father back in the 1970s, right? But every problem looks like a nail, so you hit it with the hammer. That's the situation. So again, the problem the U.S. has is with munitions. It doesn't have enough standoff munitions. And it's probably true that the Gulf states are really hesitant about re-entering the conflict. That's probably true. Saudi Arabia, in particular, has been very hesitant about going back in. They closed, at least for a day or two, their airspace to the U.S. for their cockamamie Operation Freedom PR stunt to try to open the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE, on the other hand, is extremely eager for the U.S. to go after Iran for everything. They are taking the opposite course, but they also understand that they're going to once again be hit harder than anyone else. You might say, why is that? Because U.S. CENTCOM is in the UAE, the central command through which all, the military base through which, everything that the U.S. does in the Middle East, in the whole central command area, is directed out of. So, of course, they're hit more than anyone else, because that's where the war against Iran is primarily directed out of. But the UAE and Saudi are obviously taking very different courses on this. But I don't know if that alone is being used as an excuse why Trump isn't relaunching it right now. And it's probably because he's getting bad assessments from both intelligence and the military, and he's flinching, and he can't find anything better to do, but he's still flinching away from it. And this report that the U.S. is afraid of Iraqi air defenses is probably true. Iranian air defenses is probably true. they have developed several rather novel ways. They're using heat signatures, infrared cameras to help them detect U.S. stealth aircraft without using active radar. And also, instead of active radar, they're using cameras positioned around the country that are being basically collated and filtered through AI to help them identify it, again, without using active radar, which can be identified, and then you just, you can fire at those air defense positions with the active radar. So they kind of have stealth of their own detection of U.S. aircraft. It's not as powerful as it would be otherwise, but it appears that it is enough, and it's hard for the U.S. to suppress, which is the most important thing, which is why we saw several U.S. aircraft falling out of the sky. Now, during most of the conflict thus far, except for those last few days, they stayed out of Iranian airspace. They were never really in Iranian airspace, no matter what they said, not for any considerable length of time, except with drones, which were continually Reaper drones and Israeli drones, which were continually shot down. But otherwise, they were doing standoff strikes from Iraqi airspace or from the Gulf of Oman. But they're running so low on Tomahawks and JASSMs, the air-launched cruise missiles, that if they were to go after Iran again in a big way, bomb them into submission one more time, their levels are so critically low that what they would need to do, almost certainly, is to switch to shorter range munitions, of which they have much more, like JDAMs, like glide bombs. But to use glide bombs, you have to get in really close, if not actually in, depending on where you're hitting Iranian airspace. And that's the problem. Then they start being targeted by Iranian air defenses, which, whatever Trump said in the beginning of the conflict, still obviously have considerable capability, hence the loss of F-18s and A-10s and the other transport aircraft and everything that we saw. So they are afraid of that. And Trump is afraid, just like he said that he was going to send his ships into the Strait of Hormuz. And then the Navy's like, do you really want to lose that many ships? Because that's what's going to happen. And then he wasn't. And he's going to do it. And he's flinching. And he's going to do it. And he's flinching again with renewed air assaults. At the end of the day, I don't know what better option he is going to get. I don't think that they don't have a strategy here. Not anyone who works. They've tried this counter blockade. It was always a joke, but now they realize that it's not going to work. The status quo was unsustainable for them. So they keep making threats that they're going to renew the missile attacks. We're going to do it. You better surrender now. You better make a deal. And then they're not making a deal. Well, we'll give you another 2 or 3 days. But ultimately, the Iranians are not going to capitulate to U.S. demands. Now, I think we have heard, again, unconfirmed from the Iranian side, but what the Western media is reporting is that Iran supposedly, in their latest 14-point proposal dropped off with the Pakistanis to hand over to the Americans, that they are talking that, all right, maybe we can make a concession on the enriched uranium. We won't give it to you, but we'll give it to the Russians, which is actually what was proposed before the U.S. attacked Iran and was actually part of the original JCPOA that Trump ripped up back in his first term. But hey, I guess Trump could try to spin that around. So the Iranians are trying to toss the Americans a bone. They're not huge bones. At the same time, there was reports yesterday that the Americans were then saying that, well, during negotiations, we might remove the sanctions on Iranian oil. Well, actually, they weren't enforcing the sanctions against Iranian oil until they started the blockade, because they were so desperate to get oil to the market that that they needed even Iranian oil to get to the market if the Iranians were taking it out. So they didn't stop Iranian ships during the first few weeks of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now they're getting back to that desperate point again, where they can toss the Iranians a bone of, well, all right, we won't sanction your oil ships, but actually they need those oil ships again to be hitting to the market. So these kind of concessions, not really concessions on both sides, but I guess you could say that there is still the possibility that the Iranians could toss him just enough of a bone that he could try to spin it into an entire wardrobe and claim that he's wearing clothes and try to spin it into a victory. But if that is what happens, that is a complete cop-out. It is the U.S. admitting that they're incapable of achieving any of their goals. And the nuclear issue, which Trump himself has admitted, is just PR. That is what he will try to spin into a victory. The other option is more bombs to no real effect, and just hoping that Black Swan, with a roll of the dice, something comes out better for them and they pop up Snake Eyes or something. I mean, that's where they're at. No good options, only bad options. Him chickening out for another 2 or 3 days, or maybe forever, as he pointed out, that's where they're at. They're flailing around.
And who could have seen this coming, right? Who could have predicted that? Exactly. All of us have sat here and think of, you really want to start
90% of the rest of the people on your show too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone that looks at you like, hey, we kind of warned you that if you decided that you were going to wage war against Iran, they were going to retaliate, continue to escalate with their retaliation. Oh, and yeah, if you go in and you kill their leader, it's probably not going to work out too well for you. And they're probably going to close the Strait of Hormuz. And yet here we are, all of our predictions coming true.
The Iranians have made clear that if the U.S. renews the war, right, they are going to cut the fiber optic cables, the internet cables underneath the Strait of Hormuz, right, through which a significant amount of global traffic, and the UAE is a global financial center. So that will shut down a huge portion of, or a significant portion of global finance right there, on top of, all of the other problems. They've said that they will have their allies, the Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, close the Bab el-Mandab Straits on the Red Sea, which is like a double closure on top of the Strait of Hormuz. They have said that they will completely destroy energy infrastructure in the Middle East, including the east-west pipeline to Yanbu across Saudi Arabia, through which Saudi Arabia has actually still been able to get out 60 to 70% of their oil, and actually maybe even come out ahead with the higher prices that they've been having thus far. But they will destroy that pipeline. They or the Houthis or some of their allies, right? And they have a whole list. They've been very clear what they will destroy if the U.S. attacks again. And if you think the energy crisis is bad now, if the U.S. renews strikes, we'll be going straight off the cliff into global depression. Because it won't be something that you can pull back from. It will be something that once you go off that cliff, even if you stop it tomorrow, there will already be so quickly so much damage done that it will take months, probably years, to recover to anything like normal, including more mines dropped in the Strait of Hormuz and so forth. Iran has escalation dominance in this situation. Whatever the U.S. can do to Iran, and they can drop a lot of bombs and do a lot of damage. The Iranians can take it and asymmetrically inflict much more damage back on the global economy until the U.S. stops this war against them.
Yeah, very important to keep in mind as we're all watching this play out. And again, talking about our predictions from a few months ago, now looking at the conflict again and going, okay, we're warning you once again. Now, while I do have you here, I did want to get into the latest that's happening over in China, because I know that Russian President Putin just touchdown in Beijing. He's there to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and just happens to be, just 4 days after President Trump left China. And you've got a lot of eyes on Russia and China. I mean, just as Moscow has refused U.S. pressure to make a deal that would pause the war in Ukraine, Beijing refused U.S. pressure to lift export controls on refined rare earth minerals for the U.S. military, or they also refused U.S. pressure to then put pressure on Iran to come to some sort of a deal. And I know that all of this is happening as we just had a bit of a disaster of a BRICS get together over in India late last week that was happening at the same time as the Trump visit. The BRICS alliance was not able to come to a joint statement. And when you look at the members, you go, oh, well, yeah, you've got Iran and you've got the UAE. You're trying to bring them all together onto one team when they're really not at the moment. So how do you view this visit by Putin and kind of what it means for the multipolar world, as we're in a bit of an awkward position here in some ways?
First of all, it's important. I mean, inevitably, the media is going to be comparing the results of Trump's trip ending on last Friday and Putin arriving in Beijing, as you said, just 4 or 5 days later, following up Trump. And we all know the results of Trump's visit to China, the bountiful feast of deals and successes that there was, because if they serve tacos on Tuesdays in Trump's White House, you know what they serve on Fridays?
What do they serve on Fridays?
Nothing burgers with with some Szechuan sauce on top, right? I mean, that's what they serve. Nothing, absolutely nothing. We're told by the Wall Street Journals and others that what the U.S. was really pushing for was to try to push China to leverage Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. And the China's said, yes, it would be very nice if the Strait of Hormuz was open, and also implying, of course, that the U.S. lifts their blockade of Iran as well. But they also, in effect, were saying, we're certainly not going to help you with that. You broke this. You ask us to come and fix it. Not happening. So absolutely nothing came out of the trip. There's no real talk of any successful trade deals being done, not finalized. There's some talk about a Airbus deal with Boeing that they'll buy 200 planes, but as far as I understand, nothing firm was actually agreed to. And evidently, Boeing was actually expecting much more. And their stock actually dropped as a result as soon as that deal was announced. So obviously not good on that end. And the best that can be said is that the trade war ceasefire between the U.S. and China at least seems to be kicked down the road a bit further until the Chinese leader comes to the United States later this year, where supposedly they'll be at it again. But Putin going to Beijing is an entirely different matter. First of all, they're going to be huddling and discussing what the Chinese leader just discussed with Trump, because they always do that. After one of them speaks to the U.S., they immediately then talk to each other to coordinate their responses to it. But Putin is also going with a host of business and especially ministers. This is a working visit, right? This is not a state visit. Putin has already had his state visit to China during this election, this term of his. So he doesn't need to go through that again. This is going to be serious. They're going to be talking a lot of energy. The Power of Siberia 2 construction has begun. They're going to be continuing work on finalizing all the deals around that. But also the head of the Russian central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, is there as well, which means they're going to be coordinating some more finance between the two countries, payment systems for the ever-increasing trade between the two countries. There actually will be a lot of energy and business deals signed. Why? because the Russians worked it out with the Chinese beforehand, and they're just going to sign things rather than bringing a bunch of high-tech CEOs along with you and just hoping that deals spontaneously fall into their lap. Like the Trump administration seemed to bring along a lot of CEOs. So that's, it's a much more serious and much more substantial matters. And there will be a joint press conference between Putin and Xi Jinping afterwards, where they'll take questions to the press, something that didn't happen with Trump. Why? Because the Russian and Chinese leaders are friends and they're on the same page and their countries are allies, right? There's also supposed to be some deepening of the strategic partnership between the two countries signed. We probably won't know really what that means, whether they're talking military or economic, but it must mean something significant if they're going through the motions of at least saying that it's happening. So a lot of what happens we'll probably never know, but I think we can safely assume that it is far more substantial than what is happening with the US. With the BRICS, I don't think it's such a crisis because the BRICS really doesn't do anything to begin with. Not yet. There's a lot of hope that they are developing an alternative financial system to that of Western control. But the really only concrete thing so far is helping facilitate trade in each other's currencies, which can be done bilaterally anyway, and the new development bank. And actually, probably a lot of what Russia and China will be talking about bilaterally, since they effectively control the new development bank, China first, Russia junior partner, and then everyone else behind, is how to expand it. That is one of the things they'll probably be talking about in Beijing. The problem with BRICS expansion, and it's a similar problem with Shanghai Cooperation Organization expansion, and I said this at the time, that inviting all of these new countries in was going to dilute the geopolitical orientation of the blocs, that it was too much, too quick. No one wanted to hear that because a multipolar world, faster, faster, faster. But again, the problem is the UAE is a US ally. They host US military bases. So does Saudi Arabia, by the way. And Egypt is a recipient of more US military aid than any other country in the world, practically going back decades. This is all problematic. And for anyone who imagined, I don't know what reason, that BRICS was some type of anti-Western, anti-NATO alliance, I tried to tell you at the time, and this should bring it home, that it's not, because there's too many countries with two different views. India and Brazil don't want a part of any conflict with the United States. They want to stick their heads in the sand and pretend it all goes away. And now you've got countries like the UAE, which is a U.S. ally. They are participating in the war on Iran. The war on Iran is primarily launched out of their country. We had it confirmed that they made airstrikes as well on Iran, and Iran hit them back plenty. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that BRICS wasn't able to come to an agreement on this. But is it the end of the world that BRICS couldn't sign a joint statement? No, because what does a joint statement do anyway? So I think that BRICS, yes, is in a state of paralysis over this, but the paralysis doesn't really matter that much because, to be perfectly honest, BRICS wasn't yet at the point where they were doing anything substantial that is actually paralyzed.
And I think that's good to keep in mind, right? As we're all kind of watching and waiting, and a lot of people have really big hopes for the multipolar world and for the potential that is there, but we also have to be a bit realistic about where things
baby steps.
Getting there slowly but surely. Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see what comes out of Putin's visit to Beijing. And like you said, a lot happening behind closed doors that we don't necessarily find out about now. But the one thing that is very clear to the world is that Russia and China are very much allies and very much standing together. And that is a big reminder to someone like Donald Trump, who is finding himself in
that is real. That is not spin. That is not multipolar. The Russian-Chinese relationship is the single most important bilateral relationship in the world right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and Trump just has to kind of watch from the sidelines and wish that he was in the same position there. There is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Y'all be sure to check out his work at boosty.to/therealpolitik. Thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
Ugh, when is my allergy spray gonna kick in?
You need Astapro.
Astapro?
It's faster, bro. 8 times faster than Flonase.
It's faster, bro! It's faster!
A few days ago, the commander of the United States Space Command, General Stephen Whiting, made a rather shocking statement. In particular, he officially announced that Russia has deployed its latest orbital weapon in space, which is capable of destroying all American military and commercial satellites. Furthermore, this U.S. Space Force general also officially stated that despite unprecedented Western sanctions against Moscow, Russia still remains a mighty space superpower, and is preparing to deploy nuclear anti-satellite weapons in space. My dear truth seekers, even though the Russian authorities at the official level continue to refute such accusations, in recent months, these allegations have begun to sound more and more frequently. My friends, in today's video, I will analyze these accusations in detail, based on the available facts, and tell you exactly what unpleasant surprises Russia is preparing for the United States in space. For the first time, the idea of creating anti-satellite weapons was born in the early 50s of the last century in the USSR, 6 years before Moscow launched the first artificial Earth satellite into space in 1957. Later in 1960, the Soviet Union created a military space program, known as IS, which means Satellite Destroyer. This was Moscow's response to the creation of the US spy satellite program Corona. Against this backdrop, between 1960 and 1963, Soviet engineers created the world's first space vehicles, capable of maneuvering in orbit, approaching a target at close range, and even destroying it with tens of thousands of metal balls. Thus, already back then, Moscow had the opportunity to destroy all American spacecraft. However, despite the complicated relations with the United States, the Soviet Union did not destroy a single American satellite. Instead, Moscow destroyed several Soviet target satellites, demonstrating to the United States its unlimited capabilities in space. Back then, the Soviet counterspace program horrified Americans, after which the Pentagon began to behave more restrainedly in space. Unfortunately, in the early 90s of the last century, after Boris Yeltsin came to power, the counterspace program was completely stopped. Boris Yeltsin gave the order to stop this program amid the political détente and disarmament. As a result, all Soviet satellites of this program were disabled, and the secret documentation was transferred to the archive. Back then, many saw this as a strategic defeat for Russia and a huge success for the West. However, now the Americans claim that this was a temporary retreat by the Russians. As it turned out, in the early 90s, even despite Boris Yeltsin's order to get rid of the counterspace program, the Russian military continued to covertly develop the idea of anti-satellite weapons. And with the coming to power of Vladimir Putin, Russia has received more diverse ways to destroy spacecraft in space. For example, Russian MiG-31 supersonic interceptors, armed with missiles of the Contact system, are capable of destroying American satellites in low orbits. Furthermore, Russia is also capable of shooting down American satellites using the latest air defense system, S-500 Prometheus. It is also worth noting the Russian laser weapon Zadira. In addition, Russia also has at its disposal powerful electronic warfare systems that are capable not only of blinding American satellites, but also of burning all the electronics of these spacecraft.
Hungry Root makes sticking to my anti-inflammatory diet so easy. I just started an anti-inflammatory diet, and at first I was
It is noteworthy that information about these Russian weapons systems is publicly available, and Moscow recognizes their existence. However, as for information about space weapons in Earth orbit that are capable of destroying American satellites, Russia continues to hide from the public. As a whole, the concern of the commander of the United States Space Command, General Stephen Whiting, is understandable. There are really enough reasons for his concern. Over the past 11 months alone, the Russian military has deployed 130 satellites in space. At the same time, Russia continues to keep the true purpose of these spacecraft a secret. Nevertheless, General Stephen Whiting, citing U.S. intelligence data, claims that the Russians have deployed the latest satellites of the Nivler system in space, capable of destroying any target in Earth orbit. It is reported that these latest Russian satellites can move independently in orbit, fly up to enemy satellites at close range for their thorough inspection, and even destroy them if necessary. It is noteworthy that due to the availability of appropriate weapons, the weight of one such Russian satellite can reach 20 tons. It is worth noting that Americans have been regularly reporting on the unusual behavior of the latest Russian satellites since 2013. They state that Russian spacecraft not only track American satellites by mirroring their orbits, but also come close enough for scanning and analysis. However, the Americans were really scared in May 2025, when Russia launched its newest spacecraft into space, and it suddenly began to chase the most advanced American spy satellite, NRO 338 Keyhole. It is well known that it is this American spy satellite that provides the U.S. Army with the clearest images and is the Pentagon's most valuable asset. At the moment, the Russian spacecraft is in the same orbit as the American spy satellite and continues to pursue it without getting close. Furthermore, in early 2026, the Americans officially confirmed that Russian space vehicles began chasing 2 more American satellites. At the same time, they noted that one of the Russian spacecraft began to behave very strangely. It is reported that this spacecraft suddenly changed its orbit and fired a mysterious projectile that developed a high enough speed to destroy even the largest target. Later, other Russian satellites did the same. They changed their orbit and began launching mysterious objects of unknown purpose. Against this backdrop, the Americans came to the conclusion that Russia has placed so-called killer satellites in space that are on standby and ready to attack as soon as the appropriate order is received. Well, my dear truth seekers, these statements make some sense, especially considering the words of retired Russian generals, who still claim that without means of surveillance, the U.S. Army is unable to conduct combat operations even against a weak opponent. Against this background, it becomes clear that in the event of a major war, the first thing Russia will do is destroy all American surveillance satellites in space, and then finish off the blind American forces on the ground. Nevertheless, let's hope that common sense will prevail, and this major war will never happen.
Coffee. Follow me.